most of the work that's been done on this shows it's more of a habitat and nutrition thing than a genetic thing. They did a study where they captured a bunch of deer from the lower coastal plain, brought them to their research facility at Mississippi State, put them in pens, and put them on 20% protein, which basically was, high protein diet, similar to what deer from the Delta region had. They also captured some Delta deer and brought them to their facility and put them on the same diet. They kept them separate. And eventually, the lower coastal plain deer became just as big body size and antler wise as the Delta deer, but it took 2 generations of deer to do it. There's a delay, and it's called epigenetics. And this is important for deer hunters to understand how this works. The simplest way to explain it to you is you were present in your grandmother's womb. Your mother, when she was in your grandmother's womb, before she was born, she had all the eggs in her body she would ever have in her lifetime. The egg that was you was in your mother, in your grandmother's womb. The health condition of your grandmother, the stress level of your grandmother, had an effect on you as an egg that carries through your expression of your genetics through your lifetime. And that's called epigenetics.
Lindsay Thomas Jr., it's about time we had you on the show, man.
It is about time. Thank you for having me, man. I've been fans of you guys for a long time. Y'all do a great job. Have some fantastic guests on there. Honestly, I never really thought of myself as a potential guest for y'all because y'all have so many great hunters, great deer hunters, who really have a lot of great advice on how to hunt deer. And, that's not really who I am. But I appreciate it. It's an honor to be on this podcast.
Well, Lindsay, I've known about you for a long time, and we'll kind of get into some of your background, but I've heard you on other shows. I've read some of your articles and everything that you've written, and, we released that Freezer Queen shirt last year, and you ordered one, and I saw your name come across when I was shipping out orders. I was like, oh, Lindsay Thomas Jr. ordered a shirt. Cool.
I started to wear it for this. That is a great shirt. NDA, we are spending a lot of time these days promoting doe harvest because we need to. The statistics out there are showing that we're struggling to nationally and in many states to maintain good doe harvest. So somebody promoting doe harvest like that and making it cool with a cool t-shirt, absolutely, I'm on board. As soon as I saw it, I ordered.
Hey man, we're all about some doe freezer queens, baby. We're all about some freezer queens. Now, Lindsay, I think one really interesting kind of angle for this podcast is that you're a journalist and a deer hunter, and you've spent basically your career covering you're bridging the gap between hunters and biology, essentially. So I think you have a really unique perspective, and you've talked to so many prominent biologists, people who've made breakthroughs in our world over the last 20 some odd years, that there's just a ton to get into here. But to start out, what is your background? How did you get started with the QDMA and all that?
So I'm a journalist. I got my journalism degree right here at the University of Georgia Journalism School. Kind of in the back of my head, I always dreamed I'd be an outdoor writer, but at that time, I didn't know how you did that. There was no internet. There was no, email. How did you get published as an outdoor writer? That wasn't clear to me. And I figured I'd end up writing for a newspaper or something, but I got lucky. Georgia Outdoor News advertised for an editor, somebody with a journalism degree, and I said, hey, that's me, and got the job. Worked there for 9 years. It was fantastic. I learned so much from those guys covering hunting, fishing, all of it in the outdoors here in Georgia. And then got fortunate to get a job with the Quality Deer Management Association as their publications director. Because again, at that time, this was 2003, the internet was relatively new. The magazine for us was really most of our communication outreach. So I've been with the organization since then. QDMA, of course, is now the National Deer Association, and we are now fully digital. We no longer have a print magazine. Everything is social media, website, email, video. So the full gamut there. But yeah, I've been a journalist for that whole career, and my specialty, at GON, I love to hunt and fish and do all of it. Turkey hunt, deer hunt, all kind of fishing. And GOM was nice because you were doing something different in every season, covering it all. But my passion is deer and habitat management for deer, and deer science, the biology of it, learning from the scientists. So to come to QDMA now, National Deer Association, was really perfect for me, as for my personal interests as a hunter and as a journalist. And so that's what I've been doing for my career, is learning from the true experts in all this, the scientists, the researchers. And I've been at this long enough now that I've seen researchers present their studies when they were graduate students, and they're now professors teaching other graduate students. Some of them have even now retired. So that's how long I've been in doing this. And it's just fun because it's always new. There's always new science coming out, always new technology, bringing new information in, old ideas getting updated, getting revised. And I just love that process of following the science. And then, like you said, applying that to what I do as a deer hunter, deer manager, habitat manager, where me and my family hunt, and putting that to practical use for myself as a hunter. And then, of course, that all comes back to my communication to other deer hunters, is explaining to them the science, putting it in terms they can understand, and helping them see how it applies to what they do.
Okay, cool. That's interesting too that you wanted to be an outdoor writer. That's kind of how I got started doing all this. I wanted to do the same thing, and I was at Auburn, like I said, going to the School of Forestry. And I ended up talking on the phone one time to John Phillips, and he was like, I was asking for advice. He's like, "Hey, you need to switch to journalism. You need to do that." But I was in too deep. I was like, "There's no way I could." I was like at the end of my junior year. Anyways, that's a total side note. But what were the early days of the QDMA like back in early 2000s?
Yeah, for me, for what I was doing with them, the magazine was everything. We didn't produce an email newsletter. We had a website, but it was rudimentary. It was just a billboard of who we are and what we do. And social media, Facebook wasn't even around then at that point. And so, yeah, it was magazine deadlines. For the organization at that point, it was pretty well known. It was founded in 1988. A lot of the impact of the organization had already happened in terms of getting hunters to harvest does, getting them to think about the benefits of protecting young bucks, getting them to think about habitat improvement, and just overall herd management. So it was a great time to be a part of that, to come on board. So many of the people that are big names now were fresh and on the scene then and brand new. Nobody'd heard of Craig Harper. And, one of the first issues of the magazine we put out had an article by Craig Harper in there and I didn't know who he was. And not many people knew who he was either. But anyhow, so it was a great time, and the organization was growing. I just came on at a good time. For me, career-wise too, I've seen the arc come completely from traditional print communication, magazines when magazines ruled. Over time, my career with the organization, digital becoming more and more important, more and more insistent and urgent that you play a part in that, to now where we have, like many other outfits, hunting groups, hunting magazines, newspapers around everywhere have made this transition away from print to fully digital, and we've done that as well. And it's been a game changer for us because we reach far more people for a lot less money. And it's just, that's how things have changed. So we've come from a print organization that made books and magazines to a fully digital organization across my career. And it's been, change is always tough, but I'm also a huge fan of all the new tools that are coming along that help us reach more people and communicate. I mean, imagine if when I thought I wanted to be an outdoor writer, at that time, there were so many obstacles to that. I couldn't imagine a day when, heck, all you had to have was a YouTube channel and a blog and an email newsletter, and you could be a communicator. Nobody had to hire you. Nobody could stop you from doing that. And so many people like y'all today are self-made outdoor communicators out there, and I just love that.
Yeah, man. It's cool talking about early days of the QDMA because I remember being young in a hunting club in Alabama, early 2000s with my dad and my grandfather, a whole bunch of guys from our church. It was like our church hunting club. And we were just starting to hear about QDMA at that point. And just some of the information that you guys were putting out about wanting to shoot does, my grandfather was anti-shooting does. He was like, you don't shoot a doe, like, because he was from a time when you couldn't shoot does in Alabama, and he carried that with him. He's like, it was like pulling teeth trying to get him to shoot a doe. He ended up doing it, but he didn't like it. What was the main pieces of information that you guys were trying to get across to hunters during that time frame? Like, what were the quote unquote big rocks that you were trying to move as far as deer management on a large scale across the South or across the country, I guess?
Yeah, well, initially, when Joe Hamilton founded the organization, doe harvest was probably the big one, because Joe and others were seeing around the Southeast that we had come past the point of traditional restoration and restocking era where you don't shoot a doe and you're trying to build the population. Even though that guideline was, hunters were still following it and passionate about it, we'd reached a point where deer were now becoming overpopulated because no one was harvesting does. And it was impacting the habitat. It was, deer population health was not good. Meanwhile, we're shooting the first buck that comes along, because again, that was what you did. It was buck only, and if you didn't shoot the first buck you saw, you might not get one that year. People were still doing that, and so herds were skewed toward younger bucks. Very few bucks made it into older age classes, but heavily populated with does. So, getting people to harvest does, getting them to think about protect yearling bucks, that was sort of like you said, the big rocks we had to push early on. Then it became, as you got more into habitat management, food plots became a big thing, and we had lots of questions about food plots. How do you do that? But at the same time, a lot of the research was starting to show that, hey, you need to look beyond the food plot too. Food plots are great, but you can't carry a deer herd on food plots. Look beyond that. Look into the forest, look at the native plants, the species that deer browse 365 days a year. Learn about them, learn about how to encourage those, learn how to use fire, which is a natural habitat management process and tool. So things like that. And we did see this happen. Another big one too, now that I think about it, was getting hunters to talk about age, to talk about buck age. I know even when I started with QDMA, and certainly when I was before that with Georgia Outdoor News, score was the thing. You talked about score. What does that buck score? And over my career, I've come to a point now where I realize far more hunters now talk about how old is that buck before they'll say, what does he score? Now, score is still important, and people talk about that, and we talk about, and get bucks measured, and this buck is this class or what. But people also understand that age is really how you need to be managing deer if you want to improve the buck age structure where you hunt and see more older bucks. You need to be looking at bucks and thinking age first rather than score. Mm-hmm. So those are some of we have moved a lot of those needles in people thinking about bucks by age, people thinking beyond the food plot when it comes to habitat management. Yeah.
I remember some of the older, I don't know when y'all started coming out with these, but the posters, you see them at like bow shops, you see them at hunting clubs, where it would have the age structure. It'd be photos of a 1.5-year-old buck to like a 6.5-year-old plus buck, just, very, mature buck, old mature buck, and seeing that the body characteristics between them all, and those posters being everywhere. And I think that's something that as well is kind of interesting. And then also like the marketing. I'm sure this is Georgia's the same way, but you still have a lot of clubs in Alabama that are like, oh, we're a QDMA managed club for 25 years or what, and they kind of have their regulations of, how they try to manage those clubs. But just seeing those posters and those printouts everywhere was kind of interesting as well, because, went from the idea, like you just mentioned, where it's like everything used to be talked about score is still talked about a ton. But looking at body characteristics to try to figure out how to age a buck on the hoof and see if it's part of your management goal to be able to, take that deer out of the herd and have you a nice buck to take home and a bunch of meat as well.
Yeah. I remember when I came up with the idea for Age This, which was in our magazine for a number of years, where we show trail cameras of bucks that readers have submitted and have a panel of experts, tell you what they think their age is. And it was at a public hearing we had, or public meeting, seminar type thing for hunters, and everybody's standing around outside the community center there that evening before the meeting got started. And There was a guy there with a photo album. This, of course, was when trail cameras meant go into the 1 hour photo place with your roll of film to get your pictures developed. He had a photo album full of all his trail camera pictures of bucks, and a crowd was standing around him. And he was flipping through them, and he was asking people, how old do you think this buck is? How old do you think this buck is? And everybody was providing their opinion. And that was when it hit me that, wow, people are beginning to talk about age, but they need some more regular help from folks who understand this process and how the body characteristics can help you identify bucks of different ages. Let's do a feature on that. And it's still, to this day, it's in our newsletter every week. We have a new buck and let people, respond to the survey and estimate the age. And then we reply and tell them what our team thinks of that deer. So I do believe that we've had a huge impact on that in terms of the mindset of hunters, not necessarily thinking about age, but in terms of getting better at, estimating the ages of bucks. Because in the end of the day, as we often say, the most important age class to be able to recognize is a yearling buck. And that's the easiest to recognize, thankfully. And if you can protect most or all of your yearling bucks, you're going to see better hunting. You're going to improve the buck age structure. You don't really have to be able to separate 3 from 4 and 4 from 5. That's pretty tough, but it's fun to try to do. The important thing is just, recognizing those yearlings.
Absolutely. I would love to go even deeper on aging deer on the hoof, whether it's trail camera or from the stand. For someone who is wanting, it's their goal, hey, I just want to kill some older bucks. I want to start shooting more 4-year-olds or older, just mature deer. What are the baseline characteristics someone needs to look at or look for, no matter where in the country they're at, in order to start putting those pieces together when they're looking at trail camera photos or they're in the stand?
Yeah, so there's a few basic guidelines, and it can get, it can be tough. One of the most important things you can do locally is estimate the age of bucks in your trail camera photos, give it a shot. Then if you harvest one of those bucks, take the jawbone to a biologist if you don't know how to age the jawbone yourself, or send a incisor tooth off for cementum aging and find out how old he was. And then, refine your technique as you go along. Because particularly for older deer, it can be difficult to separate. Like I said, 3 from 4 is a tough one to do often, and 4 from 5. But basically with a yearling, again, it's one of the easiest deer to spot in the woods. They just look juvenile. They often have a short nose, a short neck. That neck will be very slender. We look at where, in a profile view, where the neck joins the body, and does it come down and join the body, and then there's another clear section before you get to the brisket, or does it flow into the brisket? And with a yearling, there's a clear bottleneck between the neck and the body, because that neck is so small. And they'll often have high rear end, long legs. They'll look very leggy. Long legs is one of the big signs of a young deer in 1 and 2-year-olds. Now you got to remember, you want to be doing this in the fall. In summer, all deer look young. All bucks have slender necks in the summer. It's the testosterone that comes along in the fall during the rut that makes the neck swell, which is why you kind of wait till then. We tell people, don't look at bucks in velvet and try to age them. You can try, but just understand that those body characteristics are going to change by the time you get to fall. With 3-year-old, 2.5 looks just like a beefier yearling usually. Again, the stomach doesn't hang below the brisket. That's one of the ones I look at. The waistline is slim, long legs, but just a little bit more muscular and developed than a yearling. When you get to 3, that's when you're looking at an athletic deer. And we talk about front heavy, 3.5 being typically front heavy, meaning their shoulders, their chest, their neck are now very well developed, but their hindquarters are not, and their stomach is still slim. They're still very athletic looking. The legs now kind of look like they're about the right length for the body. Not because the legs length has changed, it's because the body is growing down. The body is filling out and growing down the legs. So now it looks like the legs are about the right length for what you'd expect for the body, but front heavy. 4.5, he's no longer front heavy. Usually now we talk about a rectangular body because the hindquarters are as well developed as the front, the chest, and the shoulders. So he's kind of rectangular. The stomach is filling in, so he's got a flat line along the bottom. And then by the time you're 5.5 plus with those mature deer, again, it can be tough to separate them 4 to 5 and on, but you often see that stomach hang down below the level of the brisket. They're filling out. Just like people, as you get older, you get a belly. you get some sagging. That neck now certainly, and even at 4 as well, that neck flows right into the brisket during the rut. There's very little junction or separation between the neck. Again, looking at the profile view, it takes a good photo. You can't age a buck in every photo, all right? You need a broadside view, standing still, not jumping, not running, not approaching you, not going away, head up, not head down on the ground, so that you can see the neck and see how it flows into the brisket. So those are some of the keys. And again, with older deer, you'll see loose skin sometimes. You'll see scarring. These are some of the other cues you look at, for those to recognize some of those older deer. And then, yeah, sometimes as they get really old, they often have smaller antlers as they get older. And so people want to look at those deer and call them younger, and they're not looking at the body. They're not seeing the sags and the short legs and the belly that hangs down and sway back, those kinds of things. But yeah, it's that's the basics.
Also, in addition to that, is there any documentation of getting a ballpark estimate on looking at buck's track or deer's track of potentially how old that deer could be?
No, and the data that's been done on that. In fact, I wrote an article recently about that. Went back and pulled some of the studies that were done. One was done here in Georgia at Piedmont Refuge. I think it was 150 to 200 deer harvested by hunters on public land that the scientists collected data on. And not only did this show us that it's very, very difficult to try to tell a buck from a doe track, that there's a lot of overlap, that basically what you can say is, of all the tracks out there, the top 8% in size, biggest, width, length, are going to be a buck. There's a big section in there that overlaps that are adult does and adult bucks with the same size feet. And even like some adult bucks, 3 and 4 year old bucks whose feet were smaller than younger does, or as the same size. So there's a lot of mixing in that area that prevents you from separating bucks from does. And in terms of just bucks, they saw some older bucks with average to below average hoof width, hoof length. So there's really no consistent pattern there that would allow you to sort a buck track by age. Again, all you can say is about the top 8% of all the tracks you see out there in size are probably a buck. And even then you can't say a mature buck.
So when it comes to packing your gear into the woods, there's really one thing that matters the most to me, and that is being able to have everything very secure and within the footprint of your torso, essentially, which means that I don't want anything sticking out from either side. I don't want anything sticking up above my back. You just want to keep everything really tight, close to the body, so you're not snagging on things when you're walking through the woods. To do that, it's important to have a backpack that has a lot of options for how you can attach things to the pack. This is the Ranger 22 and Ranger 33 from Latitude, two of our favorite packs. And the reason I like these packs is because they've got 2 straps that go across the body of the pack. They've got this panel that goes over those straps, and then you also have straps on the bottom of the backpack as well. What that allows me to do is I can attach my sticks and my platform in a variety of different ways that keeps everything very secure and kind of covered up. Like you can see, I've got my platform right here covered with this panel. Again, that keeps it very tight, and it keeps it close to my body where nothing's hanging out and snagging on briars or vines or anything as I'm trying to make my way to the stand, which keeps me quiet and keeps me from getting aggravated when I'm walking through the woods. So I personally like the Ranger 22 a lot. The Ranger 33 is a slightly bigger pack. It's a really good option, especially as you get into later season. If you want a little bit more room, it's gonna make it easier to carry things like bibs or any extra layers that you're gonna need for cold weather. So you can check both of these out at latitudeoutdoors.com. One thing we talk about with almost every guest on this show is map scouting. My favorite map scouting tool is LiDAR. If you're unfamiliar, LiDAR is basically like a 3D scan of the Earth's surface. I like to say it kind of takes away all the surprises. LiDAR is now available on onX Hunt on their topography map. If you go to your app right now, click on the topography map, you can flip on that LiDAR feature and boom, it's going to come on and you're going to see what I'm talking about. The LiDAR is going to allow you to see things that are normally hidden from view. This might be ditches, bends in creeks, rocks, old road beds. I personally love old road beds because deer like to walk them. They're great places to find scrapes. They're great camera locations. And before, an old road bed or an old logging road might be something that you kind of happen upon while you're out scouting or hunting.
Well, now with the LiDAR, before I go into an area, I can turn on that LiDAR and I can see exactly where those roadbeds are. Even old logging roads from the 1930s, you can still see them on there. So that allows me to go straight to those spots and check them out. It's just an incredibly helpful tool, and it's available now on OnX Hunt. And hey, if you want to get 20% off your OnX Elite membership, you can use the promo code Southern. Like I said, it's going to save you 20%. Go check out that LiDAR feature. You'll be glad you did. Know where you stand with OnX Hunt.
If you want to get a head start on deer season, you can go out and you can actually scout feed trees in summer. This is something we've been talking about on the podcast quite a bit lately. Today I'm out here, I've got a pair of Vortex Viper HDs. This is a great pair of binoculars for this. And what we're doing is we're just looking up into these oak trees, looking to see if we can see the little acorn buds on the limbs. So as summer goes on, it's going to get easier and easier to see those buds as they get larger. A tip for that is when you're looking up in the tree, you want to find a limb that's daylighted. It's just nothing but daylight behind it. You're looking at an isolated limb, and you're just going to want to pick that thing apart with a good pair of binos like these that are clear. I like to use a trekking pole and actually brace the binos on the trekking pole and sit down underneath that tree and really look at it for a while. So if you want to get a head start scouting feed trees this summer, go get you a pair of Vortex binoculars.
Over the years, we've interviewed quite a few successful ground hunters when it comes to bow hunting, and the commonalities between all of them is using the shadows to their advantage. Having overhead cover, back cover, and a little bit of front cover that adds a little bit more shadows to their setup, which allows them to hide a lot easier. That's what we've done today, and built this brush blind for Andrew to come in here with his recurve and shoot some does, hopefully early season when these white oaks behind the camera are going to be dropping. One important thing about blending in the shadows is having something that works camel-wise in the shadows, and that's one thing I like about this mossy oak woodsman leaf jacket. Is it's a little bit darker in color, and to me blends in a little bit better to the shadows during early season when you have full leaves on those trees. This is something I'm going to keep in my backpack all season because it's really compact, it's really lightweight, and breathes really well, and I really won't need it until I need it, but it's going to be in my backpack the whole time, which is really nice because of how compact it is. So if you're interested in ground hunting a little bit this year or having extra concealment up in the tree, check out the Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket at mossyoak.com. Interesting. Okay, fascinating. Also, when talking about aging a deer on the hoof, whether through trail camera or visual, you seeing the deer from the stand or driving around, how does that change based off region of the country or region of state based off average body weights of deer? Because you've got a deer here, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, that for a 3.5-year-old buck is a lot smaller body and frame size than what you're going to find probably up here where we're at. Does that change at all, regionality and what those characteristics look like? Or is it pretty similar across the board about the characteristics with the neck, the sway back, filling in the rear hams and everything? Is that pretty similar across the board or no?
Those are pretty standard. Most of those characteristics I'm talking about neck size, because what's been seen with the research is across the board, bucks are physically matured about 4.5 to 5.5 years of age in terms of skeletal maturity, muscular maturity, and then some of those age signs begin to come on at 5 and 6, and that's pretty standard for deer anywhere. Now, I've learned, I hunt in the lower coastal plain of Georgia, which is sandy soils, flat land. It's tougher habitat for deer in terms of the nutritional level than you see in many areas. And I've learned that we don't often really get in a mature deer the heavy belly and the real big body, short legs. You don't often see that. Sometimes we do. But the neck characteristics, neck size relative to chest depth, leg length relative to body size, stomach girth, generally, those characteristics like that are going to be standard no matter where you are. And but it's again why I say study the deer where you hunt and get some aged after you've put them on the ground check them and determine whether your age estimate, how close was it? And you'll begin to refine your technique locally. Yes, there are times where, like when we do age this, we're getting bucks in from all over the country. One week we might have a deep south buck, next week one from Wisconsin. And as a team, when we're looking at those deer, those regionality effects do come into it. When we're looking at a deer from, deep hardwood forests of the Northeast, where they just don't grow as big of bodies, these things come into that. And it would be like, in terms of like separating a hard dividing line, like 3 to 4 or 2 to 3. That's when we would, when you're on the fence, say, well, look, we're in Wisconsin with this deer. Some of the biggest bodied, subspecies of deer there are in the Midwest or whatever. And we think that that's what we're seeing here is this deer is a younger deer, but he's just got a bigger body than he would in other areas for that age because he's in Wisconsin. Or the reverse. This deer's in a tough habitat area. It's likely that he's got a smaller body than he should have for this age. We're going to stick with 3.5, even though he looks more like 2. You know what I'm saying? So it can help with fine tuning some of those hard lines to draw. But no, you don't see big differences in those basic body characteristics I was talking about that help you put them into those brackets.
Okay, now we're going to flip from bucks to does. Now, when it comes to doe harvest and doe management, every doe you can get for most people is going to be what you want to do. Like, you're not necessarily looking, I'm going to shoot an old doe, young doe, whatever you get an opportunity. At least that's most of the guys we talk to, biologists, just take some does off your property. But same characteristics, body characteristics apply to does, and getting a ballpark average of, whether it's a mature doe versus a yearling doe?
With a doe, to me, yeah, there are some characteristics you look at, but it's a little bit different. Neck length, nose length, those are key characteristics to me with a doe. Because as they get older, they're going to have a longer neck and a long nose. Y'all know this. You've seen the old doe in the group. Long neck, long nose, periscoping around. And with does, behavior comes into it as well. They're going to be, the older doe is going to be the more alert. In a group of antlerless deer, they're going to be the one that's may even look dominant, may be the last one to come into the opening, the one that's most alert and cautious, but also the one that's, not putting up with any trouble from the other deer in the group. And if you watch a group like that, you'll start to figure out which ones are the most alert, the most cautious, the most dominant, the boss of the group. It may not necessarily be the biggest bodied doe in the group. And I've seen some groups like that where there were some bigger bodied does in the group, but clearly there was another one that's, a decent sized doe who was older and clearly the boss. So behavior comes into it as well. This is why we also say, look, don't shoot the first doe that comes into an opening, because it's probably a button buck. In a group of antlerless deer, they're the dumb ones. They're the ones that are racing out ahead of everybody else and coming into the opening. Whereas, as they filter out, the last one to check out, and you can watch them and tell, she's going to stand there on the edge and look and sniff the wind and be careful, before she steps out there. So behavior comes into it as well. But nose length, neck length, body length as well. An older doe will have more of a rectangular body, whereas all fawns, doe fawns, buck fawns, have a more compact body. It's actually shorter. So they'll look all legs and all ears with a short little juvenile face. But as they get older, nose gets longer, neck gets longer, body gets longer, and again, go to those behaviors.
You said a really interesting term just a minute ago that I want to ask about, and that is the term subspecies of whitetail. And when you were describing a 3-year-old buck, for instance, I killed a buck in Kansas 2 years ago, and you described, when you were talking about the 3-year-old, you described that buck to a T. He's like that athletic build, looks like he's got a long body, like big up front, not that big in the back. But I've killed plenty of 3-year-old deer in Alabama. That deer was ginormous compared to what I'm used to. Same thing when he's killed some deer in Iowa. You take the skulls of like that deer and a mature Alabama deer, and the skull is bigger. Like everything about him is bigger. So is that purely genetics, or is that purely habitat and food and the fertility of the soil, or is there like a subspecies difference there?
There are some subspecies difference. We know that there's a number of subspecies of whitetails. They're not different enough that they can't breed with each other if they're together in the same woods. It's still the same species, it's a whitetail. But there are some subspecies difference, and there's a lot of debate among scientists over how many subspecies there are and whether or not these two are two different subspecies or not. And you can get a good debate going among that, on that with scientists. I don't know whether it really matters at the end of the day or not, but it's interesting. But most of the work that's been done on this shows it's more of a habitat and nutrition thing than a genetic thing. Mississippi State had a great study on this done a few years ago where, much like Georgia, Mississippi has different physiographic regions, and they've got a lower coastal plain down near the Gulf that's just like Georgia's lower coastal plain, sandy soils, tough habitat. And then they've got the Delta region along the river that's their best habitat. They did a study where they captured a bunch of deer from the lower coastal plain, brought them to their research facility at Mississippi State, put them in pens, and put them on 20% protein, which basically was, high protein diet, similar to what deer from the Delta region had. They also captured some Delta deer and brought them to their facility and put them on the same diet. They kept them separate, the two populations. They let the two populations breed with each other, and they watched this over time. And eventually, the lower coastal plain deer became just as big body size and antler-wise as the Delta deer, but it took 2 generations of deer to do it. This was a fantastic experiment because, number one, it showed us it's habitat and nutrition, it's not genetics. These were not genetically different deer down here on the coast by the Gulf than from these Delta deer up on the river in northern Mississippi. All you had to do was put them on good nutrition and they achieved the same body and antler size. But the delay in achieving that was a great lesson for deer managers, in my opinion, because it shows that you can't just go out here and improve habitat and plant a food plot today and expect bigger deer next year. There's a delay, and it's called epigenetics. And this is important for deer hunters to understand how this works. It's weird, but the simplest way to explain it to you is you were present in your grandmother's womb. And the reason I say that is because your mother, when she was in your grandmother's womb, before she was born, she had all the eggs in her body she would ever have in her lifetime. The egg that was you was in your mother, in your grandmother's womb. And that blows people's minds. But what the lesson to take from that is the health condition of your grandmother, the stress level of your grandmother, had an effect on you as an egg that carries through your expression of your genetics through your lifetime. And that's called epigenetics. I think of it like a circuit breaker in a house. That's all the power you could have in a house, but you can switch some switches off and not send power to some areas. Well, epigenetics, the reason it does this, let's say you got a population of deer that are on poverty level nutrition, and then suddenly somebody provides them with a bunch of nutrition. That nutrition might be only temporary, it might be fleeting. And so if you go out there and blow up to 100% of your genetic potential, but then the faucet of the high nutrition gets shut off, now you've got to maintain this 100% size, supersized body. And from a survival standpoint, you're going to struggle. So epigenetics says, let's hesitate a little bit. It's good that you've got great food, great groceries now, but we're not going to blow up to 100% of our genetic potential just yet. Let's see. So it took 2 generations of deer on that high protein feed before those deer, in other words, those that were raised on that nutrition that then got pregnant, gave birth to fawns who were then also raised on that nutrition. So there's a delay when you improve nutrition before deer reach their potential in antler and body size because of that. It's not a automatic shift. So that study, I know it's a lot of detail trying to understand what that epigenetics means and what it's the relevance to us. But very important to answer your question about is it nutrition or is it genetics? Generally, it's nutrition. So,
yeah, that makes me that's so interesting. And the delay there is so the grandchildren of those deer are the ones that showed the improvement
that were just as big as the Delta deer.
Yeah. Yep. So that makes me think about, we were talking yesterday with a guy about the damage that Hurricane Helene did throughout this region of the country a couple years back, and just the amount of canopy it opened in places where there wasn't an open canopy before. And it kind of got me wondering about that, because I've read the study from Mississippi State on that, and I watched their videos on it, and I was wondering, I wonder what the long-term impact on the deer is going to be with all those 100-year-old oak trees laid over on the ground now, sunlight getting down. That's added nutrition. Am I on track there?
You are, yeah. A lot of the new research coming out of the University of Tennessee and Mississippi State and other places is showing the importance of sunlight in deer nutrition, getting sunlight on the ground. And that's a relatively new thing. We knew it before, but we really didn't have people like Craig Harper going out there and really testing it and going, okay, we know that more forage means bigger deer, but how does this work? And how much sunlight do you need? So getting sunlight on the ground is going to increase. Deer are, ground level animals. They feed, they need that understory forage and cover 365 days a year. Deer have to eat every day, and they eat about 8% of their body weight every day in forage. And so the more of that we can provide 365 days a year, the more, they're going to express their full genetic potential for body size. So a storm comes through, puts sunlight on the ground, you're going to have more forage, you're going to have more cover. Now, as managers, my feeling is we have to manage that. We can create that situation ourselves through forest stand improvement and other techniques that put sunlight on the ground. We don't have to wait for a storm. But then also when a storm like Helene comes through and levels a bunch of trees, not only are native species going to respond, but non-native species are going to respond as well. They're there in the seed bank too, and that's your invasive plants. And we can list a whole bunch of them that are going to try to take over. They're going to compete with the native plants, and most of these deer don't eat. That's the problem with non-native plants is no insects eat them, no deer eat them, very few native species use them. And so nothing's bothering them. They can grow all they want. Meanwhile, deer are over here eating the pokeweed and the ragweed and the good stuff, and they're having to compete against not only the deer and the insects and the species that eat them, but against the non-natives that are trying to take over. That's where we have to help. And we have to control the non-natives that respond to sunlight so that we can encourage the native plants that deer use.
Very good point. And I think a great demonstration of this is these two bucks that you have in front of you. So I would love to get an explanation and show the differences between these two racks and two skulls in front of you.
Okay. I'll show you this one first. So this deer is 4.5 years old. That's the minimum age. I sent off an incisor tooth to deerage.com to find out. I estimated him at 4 to 5 based on trail camera photos and jawbone, but the incisor tooth said 4.5. Now, this is on my family's land in southeast Georgia, which again is the lower coastal plain of Georgia, very sandy soils. This deer's gross is right at 120 inches. So that's a very good buck for where we are, and a very good 4.5-year-old deer. And I think he was, if I recall right, he was 170 on the hoof, 170 pounds, and that's right in there where most of our mature bucks will be, 165 to 170 pounds on the hoof, not field dress. And then, we're about one county in from the coast of Georgia. So there are several barrier islands on the Georgia coast that are public land. And this is a buck that I killed on a WMA that's one of those barrier islands on the Georgia coast. This deer is 3.5. This is an adult buck on this island. And I don't know if we can get this on camera both at the same time, but look at the skull dimensions of these two deer. And you immediately see that this deer is much bigger just from skull dimensions. And this buck weighed, I think he was about 85 pounds on the hoof on that WMA. And that's a good deer. I've hunted that WMA for many years, over 20 years now. And this is the best buck I've ever killed on that WMA. This is a coastal barrier island in Georgia. A good deer for that island. The people that hunt that island and islands like it, see a deer like this, they're like, that's a nice buck. And the difference is the habitat. Many of these coastal barrier islands are closed canopy hardwood forests, and you just don't get much forage in the shade of those forests. Deer are chained to acorns as their primary nutrition source. And as y'all know, acorn crops do this. So in a bad year, deer are on poor nutrition. You just can't carry a deer herd with unreliable acorn crops. And so on those coastal islands, you just cannot grow deer of the same body and antler size like you can even one county inland where we are. And I think of the deer that we hunt in the lower coastal plain of Georgia as smaller than deer in the Piedmont of Georgia and in North Georgia and other areas of the state. Our deer on average are smaller, but they're even smaller on those coastal barrier islands. So, it's such a great point. I love showing people that buck from that coastal island, because the lesson is you have to measure your achievements where you stand, not against deer that people kill somewhere else. You can't stand in the lower coastal plain somewhere and say, I'm not killing deer as nice as they're killing up in the Piedmont or in some other state that clearly is known for bigger deer. Measure your success against the deer where you live.
Do you think, and this is, I'm going to have you theorize here, on those burial coastal islands, if there was intense management, timber stand improvement, and everything done on those places, that you could, in say 10 to 15 years, see a noticeable jump in quality and size of deer, body weight wise, skeletal structure wise, and antler size by doing that.
No doubt about it. You can see that anywhere, any place you have whitetails where they are nutritionally limited and the habitat is dominated by closed canopy forests with not much early successional vegetation, not much forage, not much cover, not much ag influence or whatever. If you improve the habitat, you're increasing nutrition. Now, again, you got to manage your deer density at the same time. Remember that improving nutrition for deer is a balancing act. It is reducing deer density to bring it down in level with the food, but increasing the food quantity through habitat improvement until you reach equilibrium there. And if you improve habitat in a place where you've got high deer density and you don't do anything about the density, you're going to struggle to improve the habitat because all those deer are going to wear out the new forage that appears from your habitat improvement efforts. But yes, any place, even those barrier islands, if you came in there and had a habitat management plan, put some sunlight on the ground in some areas, encourage some forage, plant some food plots maybe, and doe harvest if needed to make the deer density in balance with that, you would see an improvement. Now, the other factor here on these islands is feral hogs. They've got feral hog problems. Feral hogs are heavy competitors with whitetails for many of the same foods deer eat. Not only mast, but also those broadleaf forb species that deer browse on. Hogs eat those as well. That's one of the major components of those that they've been seen in hog diet studies. So on these islands, that'd be the other thing you'd want to do is do something about the hog problem to make sure that nutrition you're creating is going to deer. But yes, you would see a difference.
I've heard that about hogs too, that it like you don't want them for a variety of reasons, but one reason is that just the food stress that they put on. It's like if you got a pond and you're trying to grow trophy bass, you don't want crappie in that pond because they compete so much. Is that similar with hogs?
Absolutely. I mean, the diet studies show it. They are far better even than deer at locating good sources of mast. I remember a time I saw this at a property I was hunting that we don't have, luckily, a big hog problem on my family's land, but I was hunting another property nearby that we helped manage that has a big hog problem. And I had found some persimmon trees in a bottomland area, and there were several that were loaded. And I thought, okay, this is a sure enough deer. And I was bow hunting, set up a stand near one of the larger persimmon trees, and the first thing I see is hogs coming through. And I spent, a couple days hunting that area. And what I watched was groups of hogs coming down the swamp. I could see them moving around. It was like they were using OnX because they'd go tree to tree in straight lines like they had the location programmed in. They knew where the trees were. They'd hit a persimmon tree, they'd root around and get any fruit that had fallen, straight line to the next one, straight line to the next one in a zigzag on down the swamp. And an hour or two later, they'd come back. And at one point I had a doe coming in that was trying to come to one of those persimmon trees, and I was up and getting ready to draw, and I hear a squeal behind me, and here comes the hogs. The doe heard that and evaporated and was gone. The studies, there's new studies on this now showing deer and turkeys do not like to share the same space with feral hogs in general, and so they avoid them. And so, yeah, what I was seeing was how effective hogs are as a predator of mast crops, acorns, persimmons, crab apples, whatever it is. They not only know where to find the best trees, but their presence keeps deer out of there. Deer avoid that. And so, yes, it is a direct competitor with whitetails for nutrition. And if you have them, you need to deal with that.
I'd like to just get into the topic a little bit about managing feral hogs, wild hogs. Just to give people a little bit of maybe some advice for things that you've seen. One thing I've heard, I'd love to see if you have seen any studies or anything kind of feedback to say if this is true or not. But I've heard some guys who are big feral hog trappers, and they get hired out by landowners to come and try to remove whole sounders at a time if they can. That going out just with like some thermal optics and AR-15 and just shooting a couple pigs actually does more harm than good scattering pigs, where you can't actually take out a whole sounder instead of just running traps. Have you seen or heard anything to validate that, or what? Because I think a lot of people, when they see pigs, like, oh, I'm just gonna go out there and have fun and go shoot them. And every time we go to the Midwest, guys up there like, y'all got pigs back home? I'm like, yeah, and that's all they want to talk about. Like, oh, I want to come shoot some pigs.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I think why pigs pop up in areas there shouldn't be pigs at, is people catch them in one place and go relocate them. That's another story, but another rabbit hole. But what is your thoughts on that from a managing strategy and trying to eliminate or do as much as you can of lowering a feral pig population on a property, hunting versus trapping?
So the number one rule to remember is you cannot control them with random sport hunting and shooting. Just can't do it, and that's because of their reproductive rate. Great study out of the University of Georgia over here. They did it on the Savannah River site in just across the river in South Carolina by Dr. Sarah Chin, where she studied a whole bunch of feral hogs over the years, females, literally capturing some of them and doing ultrasound on them, studying their reproductive rate, following the litters and all this. Their reproductive rate is just through the roof. Of course, that's our fault because feral hogs are mostly a hybrid mix of European boars and domestic escaped pigs, which domestic pigs were bred and developed to have fast, high reproductive rates to produce more bacon. So now that they've hybridized and escaped and hybridized with European boars, feral hogs have these high reproductive rates. And it is so high. The number, I actually went to the Wild Pig Conference in Alabama a couple of months ago. They have that conference every couple of years to share the science with each other, folks who work on feral hog control and state wildlife agency biologists and so forth. And the number that got thrown around was you have to be removing 75% of a hog population annually to reduce it. Let me say that again, removing 75% of the hog population annually to reduce it. Otherwise, you're not having an impact. And yes, what you said about them responding to hunting pressure, hogs are incredibly smart. I think they're as sensitive or more sensitive than whitetails to hunting pressure. And so once you start popping a few, they're going to respond to that. It's going to be very difficult to see anymore. And that is why whole sounder removal with trapping has been shown to be effective. A sounder is a female family group. As the boars get older, they tend to be loners, and then sows gang together. There'll be a lot of big sows, younger boars that haven't left yet, and all the piglets. That's a sounder, and they run together in groups. And if you can get all of them in a trap and catch them at once, that is extremely effective. And I've seen it done. On the property I was telling you about with the persimmons, we used a trap. It was a passive net trap. There's several models now. You got drop traps and all kinds. There's a new one out there that are passive net traps the hogs can keep going into. And we hit 3 spots on that property. I think we were... one time we had 32 in the trap, another time 18, another time 20 or something. So 3 sounders, and it had an immediate effect on what we saw. The main thing I noted as a deer hunter, hunting that property up to that point, you go sit on a deer stand, chances were good you'd see hogs, and it got tougher to see deer. The year after we knocked those sounders out, we went back in there, everybody's hunting, we all noticed it. Everybody saw more deer, few people saw hogs. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about the science showing that deer avoid the areas used by hogs and don't like to share space with them. And we saw a difference in our hunting. We saw more deer and fewer hogs after reducing. So yeah, you've got to do it trapping. And the thing about this is people go, well, traps are expensive or I don't have the time. There's help out there. State agencies now are doing training. They're loaning out the traps. Renting out the traps, making them available to people. The USDA has an enormous feral hog control program going right now, backing up state agencies, helping them with funding and other efforts. This is because of the agricultural impact. The farm community has said we got to do something about this. So there's some money behind this, and hunters need to get involved. If you've got pigs, don't just shoot at them. Certainly shoot some and enjoy them and eat them. But don't fool yourself into thinking you're reducing hog numbers. You're not.
So, okay. No, we're going to go a little bit deeper into this. Okay. This is great information. We've had questions and concerns from audience members, different parts of the Southeast, who just are in higher feral pig areas. Like where we're at in Alabama, there's not any, but adjacent to us, like you said, like a county or 2 over, they're there. There's not in our area quite yet. And we've had other audience members mentioned exactly what you're saying. Like, I'm seeing more pigs than I'm seeing deer. They can't run bait. If they run bait, even running some kind of, hog wire fence around, a feeder, hogs are still coming to the area, still attracting pigs. Food plots get rooted up, and just unpleasant experience. What is the best resources for somebody if they're trying to get educated on what they should do? Like you said, maybe trying to rent or loan a trap if they can't afford to purchase one, or even hire a trapper. What are resources out there for them to kind of educate themselves on, to try to figure out what the steps should be in order for them to try to take care of that own problem and not rely on, I'll just let them go and just see what happens. And also, I'll say, we've got a bunch of friends also that are in the real estate business for recreational land sales. And that is a common question now coming up is this property in an area that has feral pigs? And if so, I don't want it. And they're seeing that pop up quite often. And it's actually affecting some of those sale prices and price per acre, because it's becoming more and more common where people are asking it because they don't want to be anywhere where there are wild pigs if they're trying to manage for deer and turkey.
Right. So yeah, it's certainly a liability if there's heavy pig populations. Some people might see that as a benefit and want to hunt the pigs and not care about the deer. But if you care about deer and turkeys and habitat quality and, things like water quality, because they destroy streams, they impact all kinds of non-game species. If you care about that kind of wildlife diversity like I do, and I know y'all do too, this is an animal you don't want there. So, I can see where it would impact land values, or somebody's interested in buying a particular property. But there's all kind of resources out there, and I've seen that the trapping works. Go to your state wildlife agency, go to the NRCS office, that's the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, has an office in most counties, talk to them. Here in Georgia, the Soil Conservation Service is offering these traps because of the impact on soil quality and water quality and agriculture from hogs. So it just varies state to state what the program is, but there's assistance there to help you, to train you, like I said, to loan you the traps, help you do this. There are professionals you can hire that'll come in and do the trapping. So, or buy the trap and do it yourself, which is what we did. Like I said, we used one of the passive net traps, bought one, set up the T-post in 3 different locations, and then rotated the trap itself around those sites, left the T-posts in place that you put the net on. So we would be pre-baiting one site, getting the hogs in there. There's a whole gentling process. You got to condition the hogs to the bait, because the key here is, that's the key to hole sounder removal, is you don't ever drop or set the trap unless you're confident every hog in that group is going to be in there. Because if the wary old sow or two in the group that usually hangs back and lets the younger ones eat first, it might take a day or two before they're going in. If you drop the trap on all those younger hogs and the older sows are standing outside, that hog that saw that is going to be very difficult to trap after that. This is what the experts, the trappers, will tell you. You don't want to educate those pigs. And that is why there's a gentling process, watching them on camera, seeing the hogs come into the trap, making sure, even learning to recognize that sounder. Oh yeah, this is that sounder with 23 pigs in it. Because there's that stripedy black and white pig. So, I recognize this group, and you should know how many are in it. Watch your camera, and when the day comes when the entire group is inside the perimeter of the trap, whether it's a drop trap or whether it's a net trap that's hanging above them, when that day comes, it's time to set the trap or drop it, and make sure you get every single pig in the group. Now, people will ask, and I kind of thought this is where you were going, is, hey, I'm in a bad hog area with hogs all over the place. Is this really going to make a difference? Auburn University did a study on this. And I don't know if you saw this, but had a couple of different angles looking at the response of turkeys, looking at the response of deer to pig removals. And long story short, it was positive. They had more turkey presence, more deer presence, more captures on camera of deer and turkeys after a serious pig removal effort. But, and this was hole sounder removal, they did it through trapping. They didn't go out and shoot pigs. The thing was, they're in an area of Alabama with hogs everywhere. They did document the positive impact on pigs, on turkeys and deer, in terms of seeing them more often on the property. But they also, at one point, stopped the trapping, and within a few months, pigs were back. So in an area like that where you're surrounded by pigs and they're ubiquitous across the landscape, you can get the positive benefits of removing pigs, but you're going to need to stay vigilant. It's not a one and done deal. You're going to need to keep trapping. And that's where those people might want to look at buying their own trap and learning it to do it themselves, so that when the pigs come back, you're ready and you can get that sounder when they return.
Man, that's crazy. And like Jacob said earlier, it seems like a lot of the pigs have ended up in areas because people are moving them. And you've even seen some states that have outlawed pig hunting. I'm trying to think of one.
Kentucky.
Missouri.
Yeah.
Missouri did also.
Yeah, okay, Missouri. That's the one I was thinking of.
Okay.
And so the rationale behind that, because people are like, why can't you shoot hogs? I thought they wanted to get rid of them. That's the reason why, is so people don't move them there. It's not an incentive to move them there so you can hunt them. Is that correct?
Two things. That's number one, the incentive to bring in pigs and release them. The incentive to, say for a landowner to charge people to come in and hunt the pigs. Now that there's a money incentive, we want more pigs. We don't want less pigs. If you're making money off the pigs, you don't want them going away. That's something you want to maintain as a business. So eliminating the incentives for having the pigs there, like people, or having the incentive to bring them in. But the second thing too, like in the case of Missouri, and Missouri is one of those states that's kind of on the periphery. They've got pigs, but they've got few enough of them, they can actually have a hope of eradicating them in the state. And so the USDA has kind of categorized states by this. Georgia, Alabama, unfortunately, we're in those states that we're not going to eradicate them anytime soon. Control and management is more the goal there. But there are a number of states where true eradication of the pigs in that state is possible, and Missouri is getting close to that. They got very serious about it. And one first thing they did was outlaw hunting of pigs. The other big reason is because they don't want landowners who see pigs to start shooting them. They want the landowner to call them and report the pigs. And that way, these pigs are undisturbed, unbothered, not pressured. They think they're fine, and the state can come in using traps and helicopters. Missouri is using helicopters and other technique and drones to control them. They're literally, the USDA is helping with a lot of this. They're coming in with thermal drones at night, locating the pigs, and during the day as well with these thermal drones, and then bringing in the helicopter. The drones really help reduce the cost of the helicopter, because instead of just flying around with a helicopter all day looking for pigs, you go out cheaply and locate them with the drone. Then you call in the helicopter and they gun them from the air. So trapping, helicopter gunning, the state wants to bring those techniques and tools to bear first before a landowner takes shots at them, because they want the hogs innocent and unaware.
I want that internship big.
Running ops on pigs.
So this just came out on Facebook. I don't know exactly when this episode is going to come out, but as the time we're recording, Kentucky, Tennessee working together on LBL, Land Between the Lakes, doing hog removal with helicopters. And they made some posts about it. I think they removed just over 1,800 pigs through helicopter gunnings. And it was interesting seeing online, again, the animosity towards it for not allowing people to go out and hunt them.
That is why.
And so on. But it seems like they're effective with it, and I'm sure they're still implementing trapping in certain locations and places, but it's also so remote. It's like you can't get traps in a lot of those places. So I can see how the helicopter, leaf off conditions, flying, you could be very effective with the helicopter.
Right.
But that is interesting, because again, you can see one of our good friends, David Ellis, old Yalt in Mississippi. He's a hog trapper, and he talks about he's like hog guys who like running hog dogs, or guys that like to shoot hogs, are the number one cause of hogs pop up in places there's no hogs within 150 miles of that location. They're grabbing a couple, take them out, cut them loose, and you have these pop-up locations all over the place. It's starting to happen in the Midwest. But I can see, just kind of bring it full circle back to whitetail management and wanting better whitetail populations and opportunity for all of us to, not only fill a freezer, but hey, everybody likes to kill a nice buck. How that could be detrimental to you if you have something like that happening around you. So this part, again, a wider, broader management strategy outside of just managing your does and shooting, deer of bucks of a certain age class and managing habitat. But also, if you have this situation on your place and you have the means to be able to take care of the feral pigs and do what you can outside just going out there with some thermal scopes and suppressed ARs and having fun. It's something that everybody should look towards doing. And again, I guess the more people we have on board doing that in these locations, not only should they see a benefit, like you mentioned with a bunch of studies and also personal experience, but their neighbors are going to appreciate them. And even if their neighbors aren't on board, you can still make a little bit of a dent in that general neighborhood of all these landowners. Most
of the people that are excited about hogs and want to hunt pigs and think they're great don't own land with pigs on it and aren't dealing with the headaches. Everything from, like I said, the stealing the mast to rooting incredible craters in your food plots that literally can't be repaired with a tractor. You break a tractor wheel off driving into these pits. Destroying roads. Yeah, it just goes. And turkey nests. There was a video here recently on social media showing the boar getting the turkey nest. So anyway, yeah, just all kind of, and land between lakes, that was mentioned at the Wild Pig Conference that I was at. A guy gave a report on land between the lakes and how that's coming along, how effective they've been and how close they're getting to eradicating pigs on that property. But yeah, that's why they don't want to allow hunting by hunters as a control technique, because it's not a control technique. It does not reduce the population, and instead it just scatters the pigs, educates them. Hunting them with dogs is the same way, with catch dogs. The pigs react to that kind of pressure. Certainly it's catching one with a dog is quicker and faster than hunting one in many cases, because they can go to the pig and catch it. But the pig populations, now they're going to be pushed off that property that you've hunted them with dogs, and they're less, now you can't deal with them. Far better, bait them in, get the sounder in a trap, and kill the whole group.
Yep.
Moving on from the hog topic, Lindsay, kind of putting you on the spot a little bit here, but I'm curious about, in your career, what have been some of the bigger, more landmark studies that have come out that either taught us something new or maybe confirmed something that we kind of already knew, but gave us a framework that we could operate off of from a management standpoint?
So many. Oh my gosh. And then, I've been doing this for 30 years. There's new studies coming out all the time. I think this is one thing people don't understand about how science works, particularly those that will denigrate science, and is that it's always improving itself. It's always open to the idea that it didn't have it right, and that what it thought about something can be improved with new information. So always sort of fact-checking itself and adding new information rather than attaching itself to a doctrine and saying, this is the truth and don't argue with me about it. So science is always giving us new information. It's there. I tried to keep a list one time just of statistics and cool stuff from deer science, and it's thousands and thousands of words long. I can't even find stuff in it anymore. It's so much information. But yeah, there's been a lot of key studies, all kinds of buck movement studies with GPS collars that have revealed what bucks were doing. Going back to the way they used to do it with the old radio collars, where you had to triangulate just to get one position off of a deer, and one point of location. And now GPS collars are giving you, a location every 15 minutes or whatever you want to see. So that has just opened up a whole new world. One of the coolest and best designed studies, there was a set of 3 of them in Texas, one on the King Ranch, one on the Comanche Ranch, one on the Faith Ranch, a series, looking at culling and asking the question of whether culling bucks improves antler genetics. That was what they set out to ask. Because, as y'all know, a lot of hunters always have believed, and many still do believe, that your trigger decisions can change the gene pool. They can't. Spoiler alert, they can't. These studies locked that away forever and said, let's put this beyond debate. Many of the biologists involved in those studies that I talked to went into these studies excited to finally prove that culling worked, because they thought it did. They looked forward to having the proof here scientifically that culling bucks changes and improves antler genetics. And later, as they told me, admitted it doesn't work. We don't do it anymore on this ranch that I manage. Donnie Drager, who manages the Comanche Ranch, will tell you, I used to think it worked. I thought for sure we'd prove it worked. We don't cull anymore because it doesn't work. And the way these studies were set up was done so well. Like in the King Ranch, 2 10,000-acre properties. Deer managed exactly the same on the 2 10,000-acre properties. Deer density, habitat management, buck management, it was all the same. Except on one, they culled bucks based on preset criteria. And on the other, they didn't cull them. And at the end of 8 years, there was no difference in average antler score by age class on the 2 properties. That was the first study. Of course, there's a lot more details to it than that. Comanche Ranch under Donnie, and the King Ranch study was Mick Hellickson, and Donnie came in and did the Comanche Ranch study. Very similar, 3 different areas, and all large areas, similar management practices on all of them. But he tried 3 different levels. One was no culling, one was moderate culling, one was intensive culling. Because he thought, okay, well, if Mickey couldn't quite get it done on King Ranch, maybe he wasn't culling intensively enough. Again, what he found was no difference in antler quality across the 3 properties. In science, they talk about a control. I don't know that every deer hunter understands what a control is, but it's controlling for variables that might also affect the answer to your question. Those properties that were the same deer population where they didn't cull bucks, that's the control. That controlled for factors like habitat quality and forage quality and deer density and doe harvest and things like that, buck management. It kept those conditions the same so that they didn't affect the answer to the question. So these controls were just set up fantastically, beautifully from a scientific research standpoint. And this is what I often say. People say, oh, I tried this and it really improved deer. If you didn't have a control where you didn't try that, but everything else was the same, you didn't really prove anything. That's what science does. So anyway, Donnie on the Comanche Ranch also did not show that after many years and intensive culling, we're talking about with helicopters capturing bucks and euthanizing bucks with science permits to do this study. Intensive techniques that we cannot use as deer managers on thousands of acres. Money we don't have, to do this. They couldn't make it work. And in fact, on the intensively culled property, it backfired. They removed so many bucks. The culling criteria were so stringent that they crashed their buck population. There weren't enough bucks to breed the does that were left, and they ended up with does going into estrus a second and third time, and now you got late-born bucks, and now you've got a negative feedback loop that's producing late-born bucks that are getting a late start. So you follow me here? The intensive culling was worse than the moderate culling, which didn't work. And then you got the Faith Ranch, which took it even further and attempted it in high fence areas with much more intensive processes than what they used on the Comanche Ranch. And after 10 years, they finally said, okay, we improved antler score in these pens. And it was like 6 inches better per age class after years of this intensive, expensive management. It was very little difference. And the thing about that study at the Faith Ranch was they got into the DNA, and one of the things they found, in the end, everybody wants to know, why didn't it work? And they studied all that as well. The Faith Ranch found that gross Boone and Crockett score is only about 36% heritable. That means only 36% of what you see in a buck's Boone and Crockett score is a result of his genetics. The rest is environment and nutrition. And that was a pretty high percentage. They looked at things like inside spread and beam length and tine length and mass and things like that. Most of those were even smaller than 36% heritable. I forget all the specifics, but the bottom line was you can't look at a buck and his antlers and tell what his offspring are going to produce antler-wise. In like the Comanche Ranch study, Donnie will tell you one of the most interesting anecdotes out of that was on the non-culling area. And they're studying the DNA as well. One of their best bucks from a breeder value in terms of the quality of his offspring was a buck that would have been a cull buck on the other area. He was like a 115 class mature buck. He produced the best antler quality offspring. So again, this is showing that you cannot look at antlers and tell what that buck's offspring are going to be. That's one of the holes in the bucket that prevents you from managing wild deer genetics. There's a whole bunch of others. Yearling buck dispersal, does carrying half the genetics, your inability to hunt deer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They're breeding before deer season comes in. And then also the fact that buck breeding success is widespread across bucks of many ages. Very few bucks contribute a high percentage of the fawns. And most bucks are successful. So yeah, all of these reasons explain why you cannot manage the genetics of wild deer. But those 3 studies in Texas are just a classic case to me of a situation where scientists said, hey, everybody believes, even us, we believe out here in Texas that you can cull bucks and improve antler genetics, but let's prove it. let's question ourselves and test ourselves. And they found out they can't do it.
So we just had interviewed Larry Washington this summer, and he was talking about the Comanche Ranch study, but also the genetic testing they've done for, I think he said, a couple thousand deer that they had documented. And he was talking about that one buck, which you mentioned, that buck that would have been a cull buck anywhere else. A lot of the best Boone and Crockett bucks that were produced on that property were sired by that one deer.
Well, no, not necessarily. He wasn't siring a high percentage of the deer, but he was siring some of the best deer. That might have been what you said.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm trying to ad-lib it, paraphrase, but you're right. But it was just, a lot of it was kind of coming back to like that kind of deer, and it's like that deer get killed anywhere else. But it makes for an interesting conversation, because this is something worth talking to you about, and you see it all over Facebook. I know you do too, and probably hear people write in. Especially in states where that's not a 1 buck state, like Alabama, we're blessed with a 3 buck state. I love it. Okay. But it a lot of times, especially on hunting clubs, you don't see it on public land, but you see it on hunting clubs. They'll have like, oh, we killed this cull buck, and 9 times out of 10, it looks like it's a 2.5-year-old deer. Who we can talk about how bucks can damage their antlers, damage their pedicle, and then have a funky looking rack the following year. But that's what it seems like some of the bucks that get killed, at least that I've seen on Facebook. They're not just like older bucks that are getting killed, or cull bucks. But I almost feel like it's just an excuse also just to kill a deer. I mean, have fun. Like, if you're going to eat the deer, that's great. Shoot whatever you want. But what is your thoughts on that? Like, I'm going to say almost even make an excuse for shooting a cull deer. But again, at least the ones I see typically are pretty young bucks that get shot as well.
Yeah, it's either they're young or an antler injury. Most of the things people blame genetics on with their antlers is just they're young deer, or they injured something, or whatever. Rarely is it truly a genetic thing. There's genetic diversity among deer, period. But just have to remember, we can't change that. This is a wild animal that drifts across the landscape. The genes drift across the landscape. And a lot of factors go into that we can't see. So, yeah, most of the things being blamed for, oh, that's a cull buck, genetic cull, don't hold water. That's not genetics that you're affecting. In many cases, you're killing a young buck that would be, eventually, be better. We've got sets of antlers that have come from captive deer at some of the deer labs that show, a deer that injured his rack in velvet one year, and it looked gnarly and, looked rough, and then he sprang back the next year. So, it's why you just, the whole thing about using it as an excuse, if you just want to take a deer that makes you happy, more power to you, do that. If it's a legal deer and it makes you happy, my hat's off to you, take it home with you. Is there some societal pressure that's affecting that's making people feel like they've got to say this was a cull buck to justify it, so that somebody doesn't tell it, I wouldn't have shot that deer? That's probably involved as well, and that's unfortunate. That's probably one of the unfortunate byproducts of improved deer herd management, is the people who, for whatever reason, are going to shame other people's deer. And then, you end up with somebody who feels like they've got to make an excuse or hide behind a management excuse just to take a deer they were, wanted to kill. And of course, that's unfortunate. But yeah, we don't have to complicate this. It's not that complicated. Buck management isn't. Set an age goal that's realistic for you and where you hunt. Take bucks that meet the age goal, pass bucks that don't. That's really it. And it can fluctuate. Everybody doesn't have to have the same target age goal. And age is the thing. So many times, this has been a recurring theme for me across my career. People coming to me and going, hey, we started a hunting club, we started quality deer management, we're years into it, we're doing all the things, we're just not seeing the top end bucks we thought we would see. Whatever that is. Hey, we thought we'd see 160s here realistically. We're not seeing 160s. I can almost tell you what's coming before I ask them the next question. And I'll say, how are you choosing your bucks for harvest? And those almost every time will say, oh, we shoot 120s or better. Something like that. The score might be different. The rule might be different or whatever, but a lot of times I'll hear people say 120s or better. That is what's happening. Y'all know what's happening. What's happening is those top end bucks that could be 160s are hitting 120 at a younger age and getting harvested at 3, maybe even 2. And they're not there at 5 to be seen as a 160. That's the problem with a score-based rule. And that's why we say, yeah, it's harder to estimate the age of a buck versus, inside spread, is the outside the ears or not, that kind of thing. It is a little more difficult and takes a little more practice. But y'all, we got trail cameras these days. Get with your group. Look at all the bucks on camera and get together and have a barbecue and talk about it. How old is this deer? Let's agree on this, and let's, work through this together and decide these deer we're green lighting and these deer we aren't. And above all else, look for those yearlings and 2-year-olds that are outstanding. Use those body characteristics to spot that yearling that's got outsized antlers for a yearling, because he's going to be good. That 2-year-old that is almost getting to that impressive point, the kind of deer that, would make a lot of people shake sitting there in the deer stand. Make sure you agree as a group to let those deer go. If this is what you want to do, if you want to see the top end bucks that can be produced in that area, you've got to identify them as young deer and protect them. And that's probably the biggest mistake people make in terms of buck management. Remember your bell curve, that every age class of bucks out there, their antler scores are going to chart as a bell curve, where there's an average that most bucks that age are going to be at. There's a few bucks that are above average for their age, and there's also a few bucks that are below average for their age. They're always going to be there. I don't care what you do and how much nutrition you put to them, you're going to have bucks that of a certain age that are below average and above average for their age class. So my point is, those above average bucks for their age are uncommon, just like the bucks that are below average are uncommon. You've got to learn to spot them if you want to see those deer that are that, right end of the bell curve.
Yeah, I think it's so common, and I'm sure, like you said, you've seen this so much, but a lot of properties are high grading their best quality bucks at such a young age, because it meant, especially like in Alabama, like a lot of clubs, I'm sure here too, it's a lot of antler point restrictions. 6 point or better, 8 point or better. My last club I was in, it was 8 point or better, and the amount of phenomenal, there was a couple of yearlings that got killed, but phenomenal 2-year-olds that got shot, which the guys are thrilled with. That's awesome. But also a couple of guys were like, that's not what I thought he was. Like, got real excited in the moment. I've killed a bunch of deer like that too on accident, and a couple of them on purpose. So just being honest here. But that club was in a part of a county that produces some phenomenal bucks if they get the age. And it was just so common. You just see so many of those bucks, and during the season, a couple of really nice ones get killed. But that was like, especially part of the issue that's even more detrimental is just the point restrictions, because you're killing your best up and comers. You're killing those yearling bucks that have a 8 point rack, which in our area is not that common, and 2-year-olds that have a great 8 point rack or 9 points, and they're getting shot really young. And if it's the goal for you, the property owner, the leasee, the holder, or however you're running the property, that shoots some better bucks, that's a great way to probably shoot yourself in the foot long term by doing that. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. I mean, we say, please set yourself a realistic goal. If you're new to hunting, don't decide you're going to shoot 5 and older. You may not even have any 5.5-year-old bucks out there if this is new to the area. Everybody ought to be able to have that stair step move into deer hunting at whatever pace, they want. My first deer was a yearling buck. Mm-hmm. A lot of us, that's the same true. And if that's, no matter how old you are, if you're new to deer hunting and that's where you want to start there. And if you've never killed a 2, make that be the next goal, 3, and so on. So set a realistic goal. Every group should do that. But yeah, to the high grading thing, the thing for hunters to remember is not to confuse high grading with genetic change. High grading is affecting the standing crop of deer that's out there. I know y'all probably heard Brunson use that phrase, standing crop of deer. The existing crop, not the future bucks. Mm-hmm. You're not affecting future bucks. You're affecting what's on that area now in terms of the bucks. And if you're removing a 2-year-old that had promise, you're shaping that existing population. And you can do it positively as well. Just remember that high grading is not damaging the gene pool. You can't do it. You can't change the genetics of a wild deer population. And if you switch back next year to harvesting bucks in a different way, that population is going to recover.
I want to change the topic.
Okay.
One thing I want to ask, because you probably know a lot of great landowners over the years, okay, of different sizes.
Oh, you're taking my question.
Do you have First off, do you have an example or story of someone who, I want to kind of get back to the habitat management side of everything and just management goals, harvesting does, who had a property that they were able to increase the average body weight and antler size score, just for example, of bucks on their property through some intense management? And like, do you have examples of that, personal examples or people that you've seen or met with where they were able to increase just better quality deer on their property through an intense management program and habitat management? Could you give us an example? That'd be great.
I mean, my family is one, but yeah, numerous other people that have, seen this happen over the years. I mean, yeah, tons of it. Because it's just so simple. If you build buck age structure by protecting yearling bucks, you take the number of does you need to take if you need to again, density down if you need to and nutrition up. You do that. Every individual deer's got better nutrition 365 days a year. And between the age and the nutrition, you're going to see better bucks. So yeah, our family, our land, we've got 600 acres in the lower coastal plain. It was a farm, now it's a tree farm. We grow timber and we grow wildlife habitat. About half of it is swamp on Little Satilla Creek, so it's floodplain. It's difficult for us to manage. So really, we've got about 300 acres of high ground we work with. But yeah, years ago, we didn't do QDM. We started doing that, started protecting young bucks, as I started working for GON and learning about quality deer management from the experts and certainly becoming part of QDMA. We started protecting young bucks. We started taking the right number of does, planting food plots, starting to use prescribed fire to improve deer habitat, all of that. And not only do we see bigger deer, our hunting has gotten more exciting. It used to be that you could rattling antlers till your hands bled and nothing would respond. You could blow a grunt call till you're blue in the face, and that never worked. And it was because of buck to doe ratio. Not only buck to doe ratio, but also just the numbers of mature bucks that were in the population. And that's something I think people don't realize is that when you balance buck to doe ratio through doe harvest, through taking the right number of does, but also protecting bucks so that numbers of bucks are coming up, you intensify the rut because now bucks have to compete to find estrus does and to be with estrus does. They're fighting against each other, and that means UGA has documented that many times. More scrapes, more rubs, because not only there's more rubs and more bucks in the woods, but they're competing more, they're moving more, they have to travel more to find estrus does and to compete with other bucks. You hear vocalizations, you see fights, you see chasing, all of that, and we've witnessed all of that. That happens so much more. I always remember the very first buck I rattled in at Grace Acres, which is our family farm, and just going, wow, it worked. And it still works there now. And that's again, not just body and antler size, but intensifying the enjoyment of hunting, finding more scrapes and rubs in the woods. Of course, finding more shed antlers too, but seeing chasing, seeing fights, seeing those behaviors you've never seen or witnessed before, hearing grunts. I've still myself have never heard a grunt snore wheeze, except Joe Hamilton and Kip Adams, which can do it. They can do it pretty good. But anyway, maybe one day. But yeah, just these are all the benefits. We have seen all those things. Rattling and grunt calls work, and our deer are bigger. Yes. I think I was telling you earlier, now our bucks are 165 to 175 on the hoof. That's bigger than what it used to be. Antler score wise, I can tell you this. Georgia Outdoor News keeps a county by county record of officially scored bucks statewide. It is a great tool for people that want to manage deer because you can look and see what's the top buck in your county. Going back to what I said earlier about measure your success where you stand. That's a great tool to see what's the best buck in my county? What's the top 10 in my county? Because then it gives you something realistic to see where you are. You're not comparing yourself to another state or a better region of your state. So we now have 2 bucks in the top 10 in our county. One of them was number 2 when I killed him. My dad killed another one. We're actually tied for 5th. The 2 deer were killed 15 years apart. They score exactly the same officially. Net score. GON goes by net score, not gross. So net score, mine grossed more, but
gross is all I care about.
That's our
yeah.
And the interesting thing though about the top 10 in the county is about 8 of the top 10 bucks in the county have been killed on our farm or within about a mile of it. Many of our neighbors have taken very nice bucks. They participate with us. You know, the number one buck in the county was killed about a mile down the road. Number two, about a mile in the other direction. So these are our friends and neighbors. We've got this little pocket in our county where we produce some of the best bucks in the county. And it comes from habitat management, adequate doe harvest, protecting young bucks.
We're fighting over questions. I have to ask this. When you hear people talk about like in the South, we have a trickle rut. Is that purely a function of you just have too many does?
I don't think there really is such a thing as a trickle rut. When you look at the science, the studies that have been done on this, there's no evidence that the rut trickles along or skips and jumps. The buck movement patterns that you see from GPS collar studies show a steadily increasing curve like this through the peak of breeding and then down. And that includes both daylight and nighttime movement. They're both increasing at the same time in terms of how much bucks are moving at night or day. It's just overall total average daily movement by bucks keeps getting higher and higher and higher as the rut approaches, peaks with the peak of breeding in does and estrus, and then begins the slow fall into winter back to the low point during summer, and that's what you see. Same thing if you graph out conception dates, which scientists get those from late season harvested does that have fetuses in them. They measure the fetus and backdate them and determine the date that fetus was conceived. Same thing if you chart that out, you get a bell curve distribution of some early breeding does, some late breeding does, but most right in the middle, right, kind of this peak like this. So there's no evidence for any kind of a lull in movement, in breeding, no evidence for a trickle rut that spread out but was, more suppressed. So I don't always know how to explain what people are seeing when they say that. All I know to tell them is there's no evidence for a trickle, for a lockdown phase, for an October lull. There's no evidence that in the science for those things.
And what I'm getting at with that question is what you were talking about a minute ago, where when you have an abundance of does and they basically don't have to move as far to find does to breed, and also does getting missed in the rut, so you end up with that second or third rut that you mentioned earlier in the podcast. What I'm asking is, that phenomena, is that what people might be seeing and perceiving as a trickle rut, where even though the bucks, they're still doing their thing, it's not like a long drawn out thing, but they just have the conditions where the bucks just don't have to come out of the thickets because they got so many does in there that they're not having to cover long distances to find a doe that they're looking for?
It's possible, but what I'd say is when it comes to hunters' perceptions and what they report that they see and anecdotal information, and I include myself in this, any story I tell you about something I saw while deer hunting is an anecdote. It's not data. The thing to remember is we can't know what all the biases are that went into that observation. Where was that guy hunting or that girl? How were they hunting? When were they hunting? Things like that affect what they observed. So pressure comes into that. Was pressure really explaining what they were seeing? Were they hunting the same stand over and over and over so that pressure was affecting, I didn't see much of a rut this year? No, you just didn't see many deer because you were hunting a high pressure area that you kept hunting the same area. Were they sitting over a food plot expecting deer to come feed there and rut there when the white oak acorns are falling and the deer are back there with the white oaks? You follow me? Those are the biases that hunters forget to account for, that science accounts for. Going back to what I said about the controlling those variables that can affect the outcome of your question. This is where hunters get messed up sometimes in interpreting the patterns that they see, is not taking into account all the variables that are affecting that other than the one they're wanting to think about. I didn't see many deer. How could the rut explain that? Rather than, I didn't see many deer. How could food, pressure, things like that be explaining that also?
Okay. All right. I want to, going back to the habitat aspect, and you're talking about kind of what y'all seen on your property, increased body weights, better rutting activity, or just experiencing the rut, experiencing deer vocalizations, all that kind of stuff. And then because of age structure, just seeing bigger bucks and having bigger bucks kill around with you guys and your neighbors. Now spreading QDM mindset with your neighbors, it sounds like, as well. How small of a property could you make an impact for your little local deer herd where you can see a difference? Because this is a question we get a lot.
Yeah. So, of course, it's going to say it depends. I'm going to say it depends on what's around you. If you can build community around you, if you've got 10 acres, but you can build community around you with other folks that are, managing similarly, taking the right number of does, protecting some bucks, doing some habitat improvement, then yeah, from a larger area, you can have some effect. But we also know if you're on 10, 20, 100 acres, whatever, but nobody else around you is got the same mindset, or the habitat is all closed canopy forest. We know that buck home ranges are about resources. And in areas where resources are less, the buck home range is going to be bigger because he's got to cover more ground to find the resources he needs. Deer home ranges in general, not just necessarily bucks. And so if you're surrounded by closed canopy forest, but you can put sunlight on the ground on your 10, 20, 50, 100 acres and have good deer forage or a food plot or whatever that might be, and you can provide more food and more cover or whatever's needed, maybe a low pressure situation where it's heavy pressure around you. Those resources that are inadequate on surrounding properties that you can make adequate even on your small property are going to help you have better hunting on that property. You're still not, on 20 acres, no, you're not going to hold a buck on that. But you can certainly have bucks contracting their home range size to spend more time where you are if you're offering resources that can't be found on those around you. So there's no hard and fast, hey, here's the acreage, minimum acreage you got to have better deer. You can have better deer on 10 acres because you can have better. Now, the smaller the property, the more important pressure management is, because you can pressure 10 acres real easy. If you're going to buy 20 acres and it's also your family's recreational property where you're going to be riding ATVs and bass fishing and turkey hunting and walking and shooting sporting clays or whatever, managing your pressure on that place is going to be more difficult. But if it's a pure hunting property and you can manage when and where you hunt, how often you hunt, rotating your pressure and do that wisely, you can overcome that as well. So there's no hard and fast acreage. You can have, particularly if everything around you is low on deer resources, you can have the best deer resources in the neighborhood right there and enjoy some great hunting.
I think that's a really good point, because when we talk about, we talk to different biologists like a small property, a lot of biologists be like, small property or have land managers like 100 acres. That's pretty small, 150 acres. And people come out of the woodwork like, you call that small? That's a big parcel where I'm at. And it's relative to your area. You go in the Midwest where everything's chunked up in real small chunks. Big farm for them might be 80 acres, right? Just relative to the area, unless you start buying other parcels around it. But we get that question a lot. It's like, okay, if I try to do all this work and try to let deer pass, my neighbors are going to kill a lot of those deer, potentially. Which kind of goes back to building relationships with landowners in your area. If you don't have 1,000, 800 acres, 800 acres or more, 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres, where you can truly kind of hold deer there a little bit. You're still not going to hold them the whole time, but you can maybe try to keep a couple bucks kind of in the vicinity and visiting your neighbors a little bit as well. It's going to be super hard if you don't have a great relationship with your neighbors. So could you explain how maybe you built quality relationships with some of your neighbors in order to kind of get everybody on the same page? Because I think that's a super hot button topic, because some people don't like their neighbors. It's just unfortunate. But like, what did you do in order to build those relationships to get people on the same page?
I think leading by example is the way you sum it up. You don't pressure people. You don't, browbeat them or try to push them into doing what you want to do. It's leading by example. It's showing people what they can have and then establishing those neighborly relationships that have nothing to do with how they hunt deer. Just, hey, let's come over to my barbecue. Come to my dove shoot. Hey, you want to plant food plots? I've got a tractor. I'll help you. It's stuff like that. Just here's my cell phone number if you need help dragging a deer out. It's those neighborly connections. You may never get everybody to go along, and that's fine. You still want to have good relationships with your neighbors. Look, we've all got challenges On our family's land, like I told you, we've got 600 acres, but really only can manage 300 because about half of it is swamps. We can improve habitat and so forth on 300 acres. We front for about a mile a 4-lane divided highway, and then a small town as well on another angle. We have dog hunters in the county. Dog hunting is still legal in this county, and they hunt some of the properties across the highway. We've got small properties that border us, that people that travel from out of state and aren't managing deer, and they don't own the land, and they're just wanting to take a deer and go home. So there's, it's not like 100% containment of the deer. We still have leaks. We lose bucks on that highway every year, all the time. My dad sends me pictures of them all the time, and he's wanting to cry over every one. And it's sad. You don't want to see that happen. But the thing to remember is it doesn't cripple your effort. We still have improvement over time. Because you don't have to have 100% of your neighbors on board with you to make this work. Just most of them, the majority, half or more, depending on the acreage, of course, a few of them. And then it will spread over time. But I think I go back to leading by example. The story I always tell that is kind of the good anecdote for me is several years ago when I rattled in a nice 2.5-year-old 8-pointer. He came busting out of the brush. And I got my binoculars on him. I always go to my binoculars first. I don't go to my scope. And if you want to get better at aging bucks, that's one of the things you got to teach yourself is they get big in that scope. Don't look through the scope, look through your binoculars. Because that 270 is bad about shrinking antlers. Okay. So go to your binoculars first. And that's what I did and saw this was a nice 8-point, 2.5-year-old buck, not 8-year-old, 2.5-year-old 8-point buck, beautiful buck. Responded to this rattling and came in, checked it out, and then drifted off. The next morning, I went to a neighbor's skinning pole he has that he shares with everybody, lets people in the community use it. There's that buck hanging on that skinning pole with a couple of guys I didn't know skinning him out. And they were out-of-state hunters, hunted nearby, and had gotten to know the guy that owned the pole, and they were, there skinning the deer and using his cooler. And yeah, there are people that in that situation would have gotten angry and said, you shouldn't have shot that buck, I just passed him, whatever, said something unpleasant. Instead, I used it as a teaching situation. I said, hey, first off, congratulations. That's a nice buck. That's yours? Yeah, this is mine. We talked about it. And I finally said, are you going to pull a jawbone? And they said, no. I said, do you mind if I do? Because we collect data around here. And they let me pull the jawbone. And I looked at it. I said, do y'all know how to age a jawbone? They didn't. I taught them. And I said, this buck is, and of course, he was 2.5, like I estimated in the woods. And I showed them from the jawbone why he was 2.5. I never said you shouldn't have shot him or you should have shot at this age or whatever. I just said, have you ever thought about buck age? Basically was what I planted, was that seed. I don't know whether that changed anything with those guys, but I can tell you that if I came in there being angry at them, that wouldn't have helped anything. So that's kind of one of the examples I use and how we have worked through the neighborhood. We got neighbors that are on board with us, and then we got neighbors that we don't, and we just don't worry about it. We continue to be good neighbors to all those people best we can, and let the rest take care of itself, understanding that we still have leaks. We still have people that kill bucks that we wouldn't have shot, and that's okay. We still have deer down the highway, and we still improve our hunting and have good hunting and have some of the best bucks we've ever had despite that.
Kind of going further in this conversation, I want you to kind of rank and then maybe explain the hierarchy from a management strategy. What makes the biggest difference to the least, but how they all could work together in order to boost the property and quality of a property. One would be like planting food plots. Next would be like timber harvest or timber management along with use of fire, both. And then letting bucks get to older age, just passing deer if you want older, mature bucks on that property, passing deer and managing does, kind of all in one. How would you rank those three from like something that you can kind of start seeing the quickest difference versus maybe something that's beneficial? Is it something that's like nice to have? And then the use case for all of that.
So to start with, if you don't own the land, if you're on a lease, the easiest thing to do is trigger management, taking the right number of does and protecting young bucks. That's easy to do. You don't have to own the land to do that. It doesn't cost you anything. Is those adjusting those trigger decisions. So you can rapidly have an impact there. This is one of the reasons we tell people, if you're going to harvest does, get it early. Do it in the early season if you can, because you can literally make a difference that season in the intensity of the rut if you take your does early. Not only that, but how much forage is a doe eating every day? Several pounds. And if you let her go through the whole season, that's a whole bunch of forage she's eating that a buck or a different deer could have been eating. So get your doe harvest early. You can literally make a difference in that season. Buck management, protecting yearling bucks, is going to take a little longer. How long does it take to grow a 3-year-old buck? It takes 3 years. 5-year-old? You see where I'm going with that. So it takes a little more time. But those are the easiest steps. If you own the land, and many people who don't own the land can also do food plots. There might be some little corners and logging decks and some openings here and there that you can plant in food plots. So that's kind of the next step I would do. Putting sunlight on the ground, you're going to need the landowner's permission to cut trees down, whether it's junk trees, invasive trees, sweet gums, and things like that don't have timber value, and you can cut those down and get sunlight on the ground to produce forage. That's kind of the next thing. Now, the flip side of this is that in terms of impact, the greatest impact is on your forest management and using fire. In terms of pounds of protein per dollar spent, it is just not even close. In terms of how cheap and efficient it is to produce deer forage and nutrition with sunlight and fire, it's incredible. Because, we might have on a property, let's say you got 500-acre lease and there's 4 or 5 acres of food plots out there, right? That seems typical. I was looking at a friend's property this weekend, and that was the setup. About 500 acres and maybe 4 to 5 a lease, maybe 4 to 5 acres total of food plots they could manage. But a few hundred acres of closed canopy hardwood forest that could be daylighted by removing the low-value trees and putting some, not clear cutting, but just removing the sweet gums that are out there, the overabundant white oaks even, the hickories and the other trees that aren't needed as much, remove those and put some sunlight on the ground and start producing deer forage. The fire comes in later to set succession back, because forests are always trying to turn back into forests. They're always aging. And that highest quality stage is immediately after you put sunlight on the ground and that early flush of broadleaf forbs grows. Well, they're going to turn into hardwoods eventually, hardwood saplings and shrubs that'll put shade on the ground and reduce the quality again. Fire sets you back. So that's where the fire comes in. But you got a whole lot more acres of that potential than you do acres of food plots. And, the science coming out of the University of Tennessee, Dr. Mark Turner, Dr. Craig Harper. Mark had a new article on our website about this recently, showing that closed canopy hardwoods are producing less than 100 pounds to the acre of high quality deer forage. Daylighted forests are producing on the order of 1,000 pounds per acre, 10 times, 12 times as much pounds per acre of high quality forage. And I'm throwing in high quality there because they're measuring the best deer forage, not just anything deer will eat, the highest quality stuff. 1,000 pounds to the acre. That's on the order of a decent food plot. So from an efficiency standpoint, the biggest impact you can have, and if I owned a bunch of land and could go out there and do something first, it'd be timber management and fire before I would plant food plots. Food plots are good, but you can't carry a deer herd on food plots. Food plots to me are more of a hunting tool. Setting yourself up for doe harvest during the season, that kind of thing. The real nutritional impact comes with sunlight and fire.
Oh, I love that. You talk about Mark Turner. Mark's a good buddy of ours. Andrew went to school when he was
I love Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
He's a knowledgeable guy, and he's also a killer. He's a good deer hunter.
Yep, absolutely killer. But now, on the flip side of all this, I want to know, based off everything that you've learned over the last 22 years being in this space, what has been the most impactful, maybe be stuff that you've already talked about, we're repeating it, some of the most impactful things that you've learned that's helped you become a better deer hunter?
Okay. I would sum that up. Hunters, you get them going, talk about what affects deer movement and where should I hunt and this kind of thing. You're going to get all kind of theories. You're going to hear all kind of patterns, all kind of beliefs about what affects this. I come at it after all these years covering science as, what does the scientific evidence support? What really impacts deer movement and hunting strategy that science has validated? And there's only 4 things. Anything else that's not one of those four things can be disregarded because science has not found that those other things have a significant impact on deer movement and hunting strategy, okay? And the four things are, y'all could probably name them with me. Time of day is an extremely consistent pattern that deer move most around dawn and dusk, period. In the story. I don't care the season, I don't care the moon phase, I don't care what state you're in, etc. Deer move most around dawn and dusk. All right, so that's number one. Number two is food. These are probably not in order of importance. I probably would have put food first. Number two is food. Deer have to eat every day. Every day. For maintenance, survival, and growth. They have to eat something every day. And the key part of the food factor is everything that's deer food isn't deer food today. It's always a question of what else is available today. So from a hunting standpoint, your scouting has to help you find what are they eating today. You can be sitting over a beautiful food plot that is deer food and they're not eating it because there's something else available. Usually it's white oak acorns or swamp chestnut acorns, which in the South is even preferred more than white oaks. And that's science, that's not my opinion. One of Dr. Marcus Lashley's students did a study on that and found that deer preferred swamp chestnut acorns, which are white oaks, by the way, 3 times more than regular white oaks. So there's a little aside for you. Corn, sitting over a corn pile when the white oak acorns are falling or food plots are in. It's always a question of what else is available. You might be looking at deer food, but they're not eating that today. So food is the second one. And not only food, but what are they eating today? The third one, of course, is the rut. As I mentioned to you before, the rut is strongly tied to buck movement. They move more on a daily basis as the rut moves in, as the peak of breeding happens, and as it goes away, they move less, all the way till summer when they move the least of all. Their home ranges contract, they get into bachelor groups, they leave these empty spaces out on the land, but when the rut's coming, they fill all that back in, they spread out. They're moving more on a daily basis during the rut than any other time. And we know, again from science, more during the daylight. There's a University of Georgia study that showed that something like, I think it was 80%, 60 to 80%, I forget the exact figure, 60 to 80% of all the adult buck photos they had on trail camera after a year of monitoring were during like a 3 to 4 week period of the rut. So your adult bucks are just going to be more visible during the rut. So the rut is that third factor that science validates as a major factor in buck movement. And the fourth one is hunting pressure. Hunting pressure can change everything else, all your other advantages you have from considering the first three, time of day, food, and the rut. If you're not managing your hunting pressure, if deer can pattern you, they will, and they will avoid you. Just like we try to pattern deer, they're doing the same thing too. They're trying to pattern us to avoid dying. And they can do it, and they're very good at it. This is an animal that's been around for a few million years on this continent, and they didn't last that long being dumb. So they dealt with predators worse than us before. And they will pattern you. So if you're hunting the same stand all the time, if you're walking in the same way, if you're not playing the wind, if you are patternable in any way, deer are patterning you, and I don't care if the rut is peaking and the food is there and it's the right time of day and everything, conditions are perfect. If the pressure management has been off and you're hunting an area that's overpressured, you're going to see fewer deer and especially fewer mature bucks. Those are the four. And that's what I've come to see is that science supports those very strongly. And when I'm deciding where I'm going to hunt this afternoon or tomorrow, how I'm going to hunt, how I'm going to get there, I think of those four things, and that's it. Now, you can ask me about other things that people believe affect deer movement. None of them have significant evidence that they play a significant role.
Lindsay, I want to take a quick step back here. I want to go back to the habitat real quick. Should have asked this before, but right now, or especially here in the Southeast, our timber industry is not doing good at all. We just had a big mill close by us. One of my best friends lost his job there, and you're seeing pulpwood prices fall. You're seeing mills close. As that market is shifting and kind of collapsing, you're hearing more and more about people who are having trouble getting their property cut. If they want to remove timber, open up the canopy, generate some revenue off their property, but also if they have wildlife goals, it's getting harder and harder to sell that timber or even find someone to come cut the timber. What is your opinion on that? Like the whole situation with it, and what does the future look like if somebody is wanting to manage their property for wildlife under these conditions?
Yeah, and that's a tough one. And certainly for like us, we're growing pine trees. We're focused on restoring longleaf pine, which, as y'all know, is the native pine of the South, fire tolerant. It loves fire, and so it works very well with a deer habitat management regime. You can grow timber and have fire very early and produce a lot of deer forage and sunlight and all that and still grow timber. So we're restoring longleaf pine. But we've got some loblolly, we've got some that needs to be thinned. It's getting dark, the canopy's closing, the forage and cover is not as good in there, and we need to cut it. But yeah, you're right. The market is in trouble. So number one, you got to look at some of your alternatives. You can look at your hardwood areas that can still also be daylighted. You start walking through your hardwood areas and looking at species. You're going to find some species that can, and I'm not talking about timber harvest, I'm talking about taking a chainsaw, girdling it, and spraying it with a Craig Harper cocktail and killing it standing and just walking away, and you're done. You've put sunlight on the ground. So selecting low value trees, selecting high value but overabundant trees. You got 3 white oaks growing together like this, pick the best of them, kill the other 2, and that one tree that you left is going to produce more mass now because it's got more room to grow. So another alternative is simply old fields, open ground, whether it's a clear cut or an old pasture or something where you can kill the non-native pasture grasses and just let that grow up into, early successional old field habitat that you will burn later to keep it from turning back into woods. But now you've got forage and cover out there. It's not a forest, it's old field cover. It's, prairie, as they would call it in other parts of the country. That's high value forage and cover as well, but it doesn't have woods growing on it. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing still becomes, okay, well, what do I do with my pine and or other merchantable species? There was some discussion about this recently at a conference that I was at, and the experts were talking about this, and what was said, and it made sense to me, was if wildlife and deer are your priority on that property, yes, you want the timber income. Yes, most of us that buy these small recreational properties need that income to help us continue to own the property. We're in that situation. I'm a journalist. I'm not independently wealthy. I need timber income to help me continue to own hunting land. And so to pay for things like tractor upkeep and food plot seed, and taxes on the land. So you need that income. But what they were saying was, if wildlife habitat is your priority, don't try to play the timber market. If it is time to thin those pines, get them gone, even if you break even if you have to, lose money maybe, getting those pines out of there. Find somebody who comes in and you don't make much money on it, get them to thin those trees, even if you don't make much money, because it's time to do it. If you just let those trees sit there, the quality of the habitat is declining and declining and declining and getting worse. You can't fix it with fire. Burning in a shady woods doesn't do anything. You've got to have the sunlight. You can burn shady hardwoods, you can burn old shady dog hair thick pine trees, but it doesn't improve forage. You've got to have the sunlight. So again, if habitat quality is your goal, get that timber thinned somehow, even if you don't make a lot of money on it. Mm-hmm. When it is time to thin it.
You might not know the answer to this, but I'm just curious about having a discussion with the way that things are going. Do you see there possibly being a large scale change in how the landscape is managed across, let's say, the Pine Belt? So like East Texas on over to South Carolina, like that, where loblolly pine is kind of king. It is in Alabama, at least, where they're planting high density stands of loblolly pines, and they're mostly growing it for pulpwood. Do you see that changing in the next couple of years if the prices keep going down? Like, are they going to move to some other plant that they can be growing? Or are they going to convert it to something else? Or what's the future look like?
You're definitely seeing people talk about that. I know here in Georgia, where the path of Hurricane Helene went through and flattened a lot of people's timberlands, we were not far off the band. We took some damage, but not as bad as what I've seen. Mm-hmm. There were some people that lost their entire, had bought land there for hunting land, planted pines on it because everybody said plant pines, and Helene flattened it. And they lost everything. Couldn't even make much money off salvage. Who are now saying, I'm out. I'm not going to replant pine trees. Are you kidding me? I'm just selling this and going away. And we're hearing people say that. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on right now with people questioning, what do we do now? I'm no timber expert and I'm no timber market expert. And we're going to stay the course. We're going to continue to, try to manage quality habitat and restore longleaf pine and keep doing that, even if we're not making all the income off pine timber that we had hoped. There's alternatives for us. For example, longleaf pine straw. We are raking pine straw under our longleaf and making pretty good money at it. So there's an alternative. There are alternatives to timber from an income standpoint. Now, is there an alternative to pine trees coming along? I don't know. It's hard to say. Markets come, markets go. There will be a time when I'm sure the pine timber market will come back, or an alternative will come along. That's not. I don't have a crystal ball on that one. So
yeah, it's a tough one, man. So another question I wanted to ask you is, we kind of talked about what the quote unquote big rocks were back in the early 2000s with QDMA and what we were trying to get people to understand and management practices. What are those new initiatives today that y'all are trying to get hunters to understand?
A big one is doe harvest. Believe it or not, we've come back around to having to push doe harvest. We thought we had sort of checked that box, and we had at one point. We had people harvesting, understanding that adequate doe harvest was a key part of sound deer management. But the trends lately have been not good. We're not taking enough does. We're back at a point in this country where we're basically taking as many antlered deer as we are antlerless, which, that's the way most state agencies track this, is antlered versus antlerless. Antlerless includes button bucks. Now, you're never more than a few percentage, 10, 15% of that is button bucks, but still that's not entirely doe buck. So if you're killing as many antlered bucks as antlerless, you're actually taking more bucks than does. We're back at a point like that in this country. And it's not, part of it is hunter choice, but there's other factors as well. Venison processors are becoming less abundant. Many processors are no longer taking venison. Or you're seeing situations like I encountered my first one last season, a processor that's a membership club, where if you're not a member, you can't bring a deer there. You can't just show up and go, here's a deer, and pay for the processing. So many processors are going to that model, where it's like a country club, where you pay a membership fee just to be able to bring a deer to them and then pay for the processing. Now, this is the economics of processing. I don't blame the processors. They've got to make a living. And it's gotten tougher for them to make a living with deer processing. Many of them are not accepting deer anymore. So bottom line is, processors are less abundant, less easy to find than they used to be, and that affects doe harvest for many hunters. If you can't take a deer to the processor, they're not going to fool with a doe in many cases. So doe harvest is declining, and that's not good, particularly since hunter numbers are not climbing. Hunter numbers in many states are still declining. And so if we're not going to get the right number of deer from a doe harvest standpoint, that's going to affect herd management, but it's going to affect other things as well. If deer become more and more of a problem for society is going to figure out a way to solve that problem without us. Hunters have always been the tool. Hunters have always been the service to society for keeping deer populations in check and managed. And if we don't do that job, society will figure it out without us. And there's already conversations going on right now about commercial sale of wild venison. Should we do that? Should we allow people to sell venison, wild venison, commercially to help with deer overpopulation problems? And you all know the history of market hunting in this country. That's when we nearly wiped out deer, was when you could sell venison. So that worries me. And the point is, if hunters don't do this, not just from a herd management and herd health standpoint, but from a societal standpoint, society will solve that problem without us, and we don't want to go there. So a lot of reasons why we need people harvesting does. We're doing things like, we've got a venison processor map now on our website, help you locate the nearest venison processor near you and locate processors that accept donations. These donation programs are a key part of this. Having a situation where I can take an extra doe, donate it, not pay for the processing. The processing is paid for by a program. Like here in Georgia, the Georgia Wildlife Federation has Hunters for the Hungry. Every other state has, their different programs. They're out there, but even they are struggling to scale up to the point to really have an impact and be available. If you don't live near one of these drop-off points and hunt near one of these drop-off points, it's not convenient to donate a doe. So we got to scale up the donation programs. We've got to scale up venison processor availability in any way that we can to help with this. And get back to reminding people of the benefits of harvesting does for deer management and for seeing healthier and bigger deer and bigger antlered bucks. That's been a huge campaign of ours recently.
I forgot to ask this, but it goes into this question. I'm glad Andrew brought that up and how you answered. I was going to ask the focus on, I say the focus last at least 5-10 years of just trying to kill the biggest buck possible, like true trophy hunting to the truest extent. Yes, people are eating the meat, but it's like there's that craze, and it's been like that for a while. I mean, outdoor television helped with that, of just killing big deer. Do you believe that that's kind of pushed certain areas and regions where people are less likely to shoot does? Does are attracting bucks. I'm just there to kill a big deer for the area. Do you see that's been an impact at all for the decrease as well of doe harvest?
I don't know that that's more of a factor than it's always been. There's always been those hunters that are just hunting bucks, or who, just don't eat a lot of venison and don't want a doe, aren't necessarily managing, So I don't know that that's any more of a factor now. You got other factors like time and availability. Everybody's busier now. You got to find time. You got to have a freezer. If it's expensive to process a deer and you can only afford to do one or two, you're not going to shoot more does. If you're like me, I process my own, but it's a chore. And so shooting more does means, more work for me to put that deer in the freezer. I don't mind it. I enjoy it, but still, it's like, got to put another deer in the freezer. So it's clear that a lot of hunters are choosing not to take does that they could. Some of that is for a convenience or economic reason. Some of it is because they're watching does go by waiting for a buck. I really don't know where to pin it and how to sort it out in a pie chart and say, these are the reasons and how much they're influencing. I'm not sure, but we do feel like it's very clear the number of venison processors is declining. The donation programs are not as available as they need to be. So that's something we feel like that we can help with.
Also, we were talking about like some processors are just like not taking deer anymore, and you're seeing issues with availability with processors. Is that due to the fact that people aren't bringing enough deer to make the money work, or where they can be profitable? Is that part of the issue, or is there another outlying factor that's causing some processors not to accept deer anymore, or not deal with deer?
I'm really not sure. I probably can't answer that. The people these days want, when they bring a deer to a processor, they're asking for sausage and this and all these specialized products, and that costs more money. And so the processor is going to have to ask for more. It's going to take more time the more specialized the processing is, and that's where I think you kind of end up with these boutique processors that are exclusive or very expensive or whatever. So the bottom line on that is I can't answer that for sure. That would be, we'd need to study the processing industry to see what's going on there.
Yeah.
And it also, it can fluctuate with like the beef industry and the pork industry. And if prices there are getting higher and the processor says, man, I can be making big money over here spending more of my time on beef and I can't fool with deer right now, that may be some of the fluctuations that happen. And I'm just talking off the hip here.
That's what we do. We do that on the podcast anyways. Don't worry about it. I mean, that's part of it. It's some of it's theorizing. But I think that might be an interesting fact too, because we've seen that. We've seen processors get shut down for all kinds of reasons. Some of them close on their own. Some of them get forced to get closed. Which again, it limits opportunity where people either have to do it themselves or they have to travel quite a bit further in order to take the respected processor in their area. You know, they can entrust giving their meat to them, and you know, not only getting their meat back, but it's in the right quality state so that they can enjoy it with their family. So
Right.
it's a that's one thing. Like I prize my freezer more than a lot of other stuff, just because like that's where the hard work went in. Like the racks are awesome, kill a nice buck, but all the does having everything in the freezer, it's like. It happened to me a couple years ago. For a while on the podcast, I always talked about like the worst thing that could ever happen. One of the worst things that could ever happen to me hunting related, outside of an injury, would be losing a freezer and a freezer going down. And it actually happened to me like 3 or 4 years ago, and I lost. It was the largest standing. It's chest freezer. It was vertical chest freezer, not horizontal on the ground. Slam full of everything you can imagine, all different species, not just deer, bear, bunch of different bird species. Anyways, lost everything. And it broke my heart. I didn't find it for about 4 or 5 days. Was gone on a trip, came home, lost it. And I was like, this has changed me completely. First off, I was also hoarding, I'd hoard meat. When I say hoard it, I'd give meat to people, but I was like very protective of it. Like that is like, it's like a sacred piece of, you know, just meat. And now I'm like very inclined, like if I get some stuff, like I've got enough for myself, but I love to share it. Like, hey, you enjoy some of it. If y'all want to make some meals with it, that's great. If you have any questions, ask me, but try to give it to some others as well, and distribute a little bit of that, because I can only eat so much meat. But also it's really nice when you're able to give to somebody, because I know so many people who are not hunters, but they love deer meat. And they're not connected to deer hunting at all, other than me giving them meat. Like some of my old coworkers, my old job, there's 4 or 5 of them there, did not hunt, didn't know any hunters except me, but they had deer meat before. They enjoyed it, and I'd bring them deer meat, and they were thrilled. So that's another thing. Talking about like does, like if there's not a place to donate, you know, Hunters for the Hungry, like that's a program we don't. It's kind of hit or miss in Alabama, kind of what's going on over there, but. You can meet people through church or through different organizations or at work that want deer meat, that you can get a deer, you can cut it up, process it as simply as you want it. And some of them, they would take whole cuts. I would just debone a ham and give them a whole ham, hind quarter. And they were thrilled with it. I didn't have to do anything else with it. That's another way you can kind of donate some meat, and families would really enjoy you doing that as well.
Yeah, yeah. We've seen with our Field to Fork program, which is our hunter recruitment program, it's adult hunters. We don't have a youth program. You know, we feel like, look, recruiting youth is important, but if they miss that boat as a youth, they may still be interested in learning to hunt as an adult, and that's kind of where we're coming in, is taking adults hunting. And what we're seeing with that, one of the immediate dividends of taking an adult hunting is when they go home with that venison, they're going to invite friends over because they're proud of that. Come and see this venison that I acquired. I want to share it with you. And now you got non-hunting friends of theirs sitting around their dinner table learning about venison and going, wow, this is great. And so now you know what they call venison diplomacy. You're exposing more their non-hunting friends to venison and hunting. They may never become hunters. That's not necessarily the goal. They might, because their friend now hunts and they've got somebody who could introduce them. But just, you know, enjoying venison with a friend who harvested it themselves, that's got positive benefits for all hunting. So.
Oh yeah. Interesting. I might botch this a little bit, but I was listening to Backwoods University podcast with Lake Pickle with Meteor and Bear Grease. And he did a little series on Justice Scalia, I think, he passed away, Supreme Justice.
Antonin Scalia.
Yep. He passed away, I think, 2016, but it was a whole story about how he got introduced to hunting and started like making an impact with like the community in DC, where he was like bringing some of the other Supreme Court judges in, and they were eating wild game consistently, like their New Year's Day meal. And he was like, you know, taking wild game into an area that most people didn't know anything about hunting, let alone had ever eaten wild game, and make an impact there. Not even trying to, just being willing to share some of his wild game. Yeah. Which is just super interesting. So yeah, that's the impact we can all make very easily. And again, maybe it's not, you don't take one of those people that's a non-hunter and make them into a hunter, but you make them a little bit more okay with the idea of hunting, like that food aspect and the meat aspect of it. And it's not all necessarily about horns and just killing animals to kill animals, but actually providing something for your family.
Right.
Lindsay, what do you want people to know about the NDA? Where can people find it?
That's a loaded question.
Well, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is ensuring the future of wild deer, wildlife habitat, and hunting. So, I think of us as a science-based organization, much like I'm a science-based writer who goes to the science to help deer hunters improve hunting where they hunt and improve habitat. The NDA follows the science in order to do what's best for deer populations. So anytime somebody comes to us and says, hey, what do you think of this idea for deer management or deer regulations or deer rules? The first thing we look at is what's the impact on the deer resource. That's where we go. And what does the science say for this? So yeah, we're here for the deer, but we also have, like I mentioned, the Field to Fork program. We feel like hunter recruitment is an important thing. Hunters are the management tool that state agencies have to manage deer populations. And without us, they couldn't manage deer, not through hunting. And so, adding hunter numbers is extremely important. We have a public lands program, improving public lands habitat. Our feeling there is, can you acquire more public land? Sure, but there's a lot of public land out there that's poorly managed from a habitat standpoint that could be improved. Specifically, there's a lot of federal lands where timber management has been delayed and held up through litigation and blockages from environmental groups and et cetera. And our program helps free up some of that log jam and get some of that timber thinning done, prescribed fire done, other projects that improve habitat on federal lands, and that improves hunting access and hunting opportunity because you got better wildlife. So public lands is a key goal for us. Hunter education, of course, has always been a key cornerstone for the National Deer Association, going all the way back to when we were QDMA in 1988, is empowering hunters through knowledge of the best, most valid, science-backed information on how to have better deer and better deer hunting. So, yeah, we're here for the deer, but, and we're deer hunters. We want there to always be hunting. You can't have hunting if we don't have deer. But there's so many little spokes that come off that wheel, like hunter recruitment, like public lands improvement. Policy and advocacy is another big area that we work in. We have a director of policy, and that's her job, is tracking legislation in all the states, tracking federal legislation, finding out when some state is planning some legislation that's bad for deer, or proposing legislation that's good for deer. And so we can come in, get hunters behind that, add our voice to that, whether it's opposing or supporting. So policy is another big piece of this. So yeah, if you're a deer hunter, and I don't care whether you do quality deer management or not, or own land or not, or improve habitat or not, if you believe that we need healthy deer populations here into the future so that we can have hunting, you should be following and keeping up with the National Deer Association.
Perfect. Well, Lindsay, greatly appreciate you letting us come down here, sit down with you, and having this conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you for that opportunity.
Guys, it's been great to meet y'all. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, for all the audience members out there, thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for listening. We'll catch you back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.